at the edge of a dry plain where the wind moves dust across broken stone, and the horizon trembles under a pale sun, the remains of old roads still lie beneath the earth. They do not announce themselves. There are no towering walls visible from far away, no single monument that tells the whole story, no famous ruined capital that gathers all memory around its name. Instead, there are fragments, a buried gate, a cracked tablet, a line of mud brick foundations, the ghost of an irrigation canal, the trace of a caravan route that once carried bronze wool grain horses, tin slaves, sacred images, royal letters, and news of war. The place looks quiet now, almost emptied of consequence. Yet for thousands of years, regions like this decide whether empires breathe easily or begin to choke. They sit between richer kingdoms, between river valleys and highlands, between settled farmers and mobile herders, between the ambitions of kings and the stubborn realities of distance. To control them is to control passage. To lose them is to invite enemies through the door. This forgotten region is not forgotten because it was unimportant. It is forgotten because its power was often indirect. It did not always rule the world from a glittering throne. It shaped the world by standing in the way, by opening roads, by closing them, by feeding armies, by starving them, by connecting cities that could not reach one another without crossing its soil. It is the kind of place historians sometimes call a corridor, a frontier, a buffer zone, or a crossroads. But those words can make it sound passive, as if it merely waited for greater civilizations to pass through. The evidence suggests something stranger and more interesting. Crossroads are not empty spaces between real centers of power. They are engines of history in their own right. They decide who meets whom, which goods become valuable, which weapons spread, which ideas survive, which diseases travel, which armies arrive exhausted, and which kings discover that geography has a will of its own. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because the story here is not only about one lost landscape, it is about a pattern repeated across the ancient world in northern Mesopotamia, Syria, Anatolia, the Iranian Plateau, the Levant, the Caucasus, and the great belts of land where continents seem to lean toward one another. It is about places that modern maps often divide into borderlands, yet ancient people knew them as lifelines. The exact boundaries shift depending on the century and the civilization being studied, and scholars still debate how far the influence of any one region truly reached. But the larger truth remains steady. In the ancient world, the fate of powerful states often depended on lands that later memory pushed to the margins. Imagine an empire built around a river. Its heartland is fertile, ordered and rich. Grain grows in fields measured by officials. Temples receive offerings. Scribes record taxes. Kings boast that the gods have given them dominion. Yet beyond the irrigated plain, the world becomes more complicated. Timber must come from distant mountains. Tin for bronze must travel from far away. Horses, metals, stone incense, and skilled craftspeople move along routes that no palace can fully command from its centre. The empire may have armies, priests, and walls, but it still depends on corridors beyond its immediate heart. A kingdom can proclaim itself universal, yet its chariots need wood, its workshops need ore, its elites need luxury goods, and its messengers need safe roads. Power in practice is never only what happens in the capital. It is what happens along the routes leading into and out of it. That is why these forgotten regions become so dangerous and so valuable. They are often places of mixed landscapes, river valleys that narrow into passes, plains that open toward deserts, uplands that watch over lowlands oases, where water turns a road from impossible into possible. There people learn to live with movement. Farmers may cultivate fields near seasonal streams. Pastoralists may move sheep, goats, or cattle between grazing zones. Merchants may know which wells remain usable after a dry year. Local rulers may grow wealthy not because they command vast fields, but because they command the hinge between one world and another. A fortress on a ridge can matter as much as a palace. A treaty with a small kingdom can affect a great empire. A road tax collected in a remote town can echo in the price of metal hundreds of miles away. The world remembers Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, Persia, Greece, and Rome because they left grand narratives behind. They carved victories into stone-built cities that later travellers admired and produced texts that survived in libraries, temples, monasteries, and ruins. But between those famous names were regions where history was made in less obvious ways. Their archives burned, their towns were rebuilt, their languages faded into others, and their political names changed as conquerors passed through. Sometimes they appear in records only as targets, allies, rebels, tribute-paying provinces, or troublesome frontier lands. Their own voices survive unevenly. What survives in the record suggests importance, but not always the full shape of that importance. This is one reason they seem mysterious. They are everywhere in the machinery of ancient history, but rarely at the centre of the story told afterward. A forgotten region that once controlled the fate of the world is usually not a single empty wilderness. It is a living zone of negotiation. One village may speak a language related to the mountains, another may trade with the river cities. A shrine may honour a local god whose name later appears under a foreign spelling in an imperial archive. A caravan leader may carry goods through several political worlds in a single journey. A scribe may write in one language for diplomacy, another for administration, and speak a third at home. Such places produce cultural mixtures that can look confusing to later scholars. Pottery styles overlap. Burial customs change. Weights and seals move. Gods acquire new names. No single explanation fully accounts for this complexity, because the complexity is the point. The region is not a border because life stops there. It is a border because many lives meet there. Its power also comes from vulnerability. A rich valley can be defended if its edges are clear. A crossroads is harder to secure. Roads invite movement, and movement brings both wealth and danger. Merchants arrive with news, but spies can travel beside them. Envoys bring gifts, but armies may follow the same routes. A local king who profits from trade may be forced to choose between rival empires. Neutrality becomes difficult when geography itself is valuable. If one great power controls the corridor, another feels threatened. If no power controls it, bandits, raiders, or ambitious local chiefs may disrupt the flow of goods. The region becomes a prize because it is useful, and a battlefield because it is a prize. This is the quiet logic that repeats across ancient history. When states expand, they reach first for food, labor, metals, and security. The heartland may give them population and wealth, but the frontier gives them access. The forgotten region becomes the hand on the gate. Whoever holds it may redirect trade bloc invasion, shelter rebels, or open a path toward conquest. When stable, it makes distant prosperity possible. When unstable, it can pull entire systems apart. A drought in such a place does not only affect local crops. It may reduce caravan traffic, weaken tribute-push pastoral groups into settled zones, and force kings to spend more on defence. A rebellion there is not merely provincial disorder. It can break communication between imperial centres. A war there can turn from a border dispute into a struggle over the structure of the world. There is a strange humility in this kind of history. It reminds us that civilizations do not rise and fall only because of famous rulers, brilliant inventions, or dramatic battles. They also depend on roads staying open, wells remaining wet, harvests arriving on time, and small political communities choosing cooperation over resistance. A clay tablet listing deliveries of grain may reveal more about real power than a royal boast carved into stone. A destroyed way station may speak more clearly than a victory monument. Archaeology often begins with the ordinary remains of these systems: animal bones, storage jars loom, weights slag from metalworking seal impressions burned, grain, abandoned houses and walls rebuilt again and again. None of these objects alone proves that a region controlled the fate of the world. Together they show how easily the grand stage of history rests on fragile supports. The forgotten region at the heart of this story is therefore best understood not as one lost kingdom with one dramatic disappearance, but as a zone of consequence. Its importance rises from geography, trade, climate, military strategy, and human adaptation. Its influence changes over time. In one era it may be a supplier of metals, in another a military corridor, in another a contested frontier between empires, in another a meeting ground of religions and languages. Its name may change, its rulers may vanish, and its cities may be buried beneath later towns or fields, but the underlying logic remains. The land continues to matter because the roots continue to matter. From a distance, the ancient world can look like a map of great coloured blocks, each empire spreading neatly across space, but on the ground power is messier. It follows rivers, skirts marshes, climbs, passes, pauses at wells, bends around mountains, and waits for permission from people who know the land better than distant kings do. The fate of the world is often decided in such places, not in the centre, but between centres. A forgotten region becomes decisive precisely because everyone needs it and no one can possess it without cost. And so the story begins not with a capital but with passage. It begins with dust rising behind pack animals, with guards watching a ridge with scribes sealing tablets, in a town that later disappears from memory, with farmers repairing canals after a flood, with rulers calculating which empire to fear less. It begins in a landscape where nothing is isolated, where every road leads outward, and where the quiet control of movement becomes a form of power greater than many thrones. The world may forget the name of such a place, but the ancient world once had to reckon with it. The land between worlds rarely looks like a single kind of place. It is not only desert, not only mountain, not only river-valley, and not only steppe. Its importance begins in the way these landscapes press against one another, making short distances feel like passages between different lives. A traveller can leave fields of barley and emmer wheat, follow a stony track toward drier ground, past the tents or seasonal camps of herders, climb into cooler uplands where timber and metal are closer than grain, and then descend again toward a town whose marketplace contains objects from places no one in the town has ever seen. This compression of environments gives the region its unusual power. It allows many kinds of people to meet, exchange, compete, and misunderstand one another within a space that is small enough to be crossed, but varied enough to be difficult to rule. In the river heartlands of the ancient Near East, life depends on predictable labour and careful measurement. Fields are divided, canals are cleared, harvests are counted, and temples or palaces organise much of the surplus. But at the edges of these ordered zones, the land begins to resist simple administration. Rainfall becomes uncertain. Pasture matters as much as ploughed soil. A village may thrive for generations and then shrink when water patterns change. A herding group may appear in records as troublesome outsiders, even though their animals' wool hides, and knowledge of roots are essential to the economy. The evidence remains incomplete because written records often come from states that prefer categories taxpayer, rebel, servant, foreigner, trader, enemy. Real life in the borderlands is less tidy. People move between roles as seasons, politics, and hunger require. This mixture makes the Forgotten Region a meeting ground for farmers and pastoralists, and that relationship is one of the oldest engines of civilization. Farmers need animals, manure, transport wool meat, and connections to distant resources. Herders need grain tools, pottery, textiles, and safe access to water and markets. Sometimes the two worlds cooperate through exchange marriage alliances, seasonal agreements, and shared shrines. Sometimes they clash when drought pushes flocks into fields, when officials demand taxes from people who do not live neatly inside fixed boundaries, or when kings treat mobility itself as a threat. Ancient texts often describe mobile people with suspicion, but archaeology suggests a more complicated pattern. The frontier is not a hard line between civilization and wilderness. It is a zone of mutual dependence, tense and creative at the same time. One lesser-known detail is that some of the most important technologies and habits of ancient life spread most effectively through such mixed zones, not through imperial commands alone. Pack animals, wheeled vehicles, metallurgical skills, weaving traditions, seal designs, and even styles of feasting move along routes where no single authority controls every mile. A pot shape copied in one valley may appear in another, not because an empire conquered both, but because merchants, brides, crafts, people prisoners or itinerant specialists carried practices with them. A god worshipped in a small upland shrine may later appear in the pantheon of a powerful city under a slightly altered name. A word for a commodity may travel farther than the people who first spoke it. In such ways, the land between worlds becomes a workshop of cultural transmission. Geography also shapes the imagination of power. To a king in a river capital, the mountains may appear as a source of danger and desire. They hold timber, stone, metals, and people who are harder to count. To upland communities, the lowlands may appear wealthy, but exposed, full of grain stores, temples and rulers who make large claims, but cannot easily enforce them beyond the reach of their armies. Between the two lies the corridor where both perspectives meet. A small fortified town at the mouth of a pass may understand imperial politics with a clarity unavailable to the capital. Its rulers know which army is approaching before the palace does. Its traders hear rumors from 3 directions. Its farmers see whether the road is busy or empty. Its survival depends on reading the wider world accurately. The land itself encourages this kind of alertness. Rivers that look like gifts are also boundaries and traps. In spring, floods can renew fields or destroy them. In dry years, canals may silt up, wells may fail, and settlements may compete for reduced water. Mountains protect, but they also isolate. Deserts block armies, but they do not block everyone. People who know well seasonal grasses and night travel can cross what appears impassable to outsiders. Plains allow movement, but that same openness makes them vulnerable to raiders and cavalry in later periods. No single environmental feature explains the region's history. Instead, its power comes from combination. It is precisely because the land is broken, varied, and uneven that it can channel movement so effectively. This variety creates a social world full of translators, brokers, guides, and intermediaries. These figures rarely dominate royal inscriptions, yet they are essential. A caravan cannot move safely on ambition alone. It needs people who know which local authority controls a well, which clan claims grazing rights near a river bend, which pass is snowbound, which city has changed allegiance, which tax collector is corrupt, and which ruler is likely to honor a treaty. The ancient world depends on such knowledge. A king may order goods to be brought from afar, but someone must negotiate the practical path. Scholars still debate how formal some of these networks were, and how much they were controlled by palaces rather than private traders or local groups. The surviving evidence suggests both systems existed side by side, sometimes cooperating and sometimes competing. The crossroads also produces religious and linguistic complexity. In a stable heartland, official cults may present themselves as ancient and orderly, even when they too are constantly changing. In the land between worlds, change is more visible. Deities travel with merchants, soldiers, migrants, and captives. A storm god from the mountains may become important in a lowland court, because rain, thunder, and military strength speak to many communities at once. Fertility goddesses, protective spirits, ancestors, and local sacred places may be absorbed into broader traditions. Names shift as scribes write foreign sounds in their own scripts. Temples become places of exchange as well as worship. A sanctuary near a road can serve as a neutral meeting point, a storage place, a political stage, and a sign that the gods themselves watch the passage between worlds. Languages behave in a similar way. The region may contain administrative languages used by officials, trade languages used by merchants, household languages preserved in families, and ritual languages maintained by priests. Some people likely grow up hearing several tongues, not as an intellectual achievement, but as a practical condition of life. This leaves traces that can be difficult to interpret personal names, from one tradition appearing in texts written in another, loanwords embedded in economic documents, seals carved in one artistic style but used in a different political setting. What survives in the record suggests that identity in these zones is often layered. A person can be local by ancestry, imperial by employment, foreign by name, and entirely at home on the road. The human texture of the region is therefore more intimate than the grand maps imply. A household near a trade route may store grain not only for itself but for passing animals. A potter may produce wares suited to local cooking, and also containers standardized for transport. A metalworker may depend on ore from the hills, and charcoal from wooded slopes that are already under pressure. A child may grow up seeing strangers arrive with fabrics, stones, stories, and diseases from far away. An old woman may know the memory of a famine that never appears in royal records. A local chief may send a son as a hostage to a stronger ruler, a daughter into a diplomatic marriage, and a messenger to a rival power, all in the same generation. The fate of the world can pass through such ordinary arrangements. Yet this richness carries instability. A region that connects many worlds can be pulled apart by all of them. When trade is strong, diversity becomes profitable. When war comes, the same diversity becomes suspicious. Empires may accuse local rulers of betrayal for doing what survival has always required, balancing multiple relationships. Farmers may resent the demands of passing armies. Herders may resist borders drawn across seasonal routes. Merchants may shift allegiance to whoever keeps the roads safe. Cities may fortify themselves not because they seek conquest, but because they sit where conquest travels. No single explanation fully accounts for why these regions flourish in one century and fracture in another, but geography ensures that their peace is never simple. The deeper one looks, the more the region appears less like a margin and more like a living seam. It stitches together ecological zones, economies, languages, and political ambitions. It allows distant civilizations to imagine one another, trade with one another, fear one another, and eventually fight one another. It is a place where grain meets metal, where river gods meet storm gods, where scribes meet guides, where settled plans meet mobile knowledge. Its people are not merely witnesses to history passing through. They are participants in the making of the ancient world even when later histories remember them only as names on the edges of someone else's empire. And because the land between worlds is built from connection, its importance grows as human societies become more complex. Once villages become towns, once towns become cities, once cities need metals they do not possess, and timber their plains cannot grow, the corridor ceases to be peripheral, it becomes necessary. The more civilization expands, the more it depends on what lies beyond its own fields. In that dependence, the forgotten region begins to awaken into a force that can no longer be ignored. The first cities do not rise all at once. They gather themselves slowly from mudwater, labor memory and need. At first, there are small settlements placed where the land offers enough promise to make staying worthwhile, a spring near a route, a bend in a river, a patch of soil that holds moisture longer than the surrounding plain, a low mound safe from seasonal flooding, a crossing point where people already pause. Houses are built from mud brick reeds, timber stone, or whatever the region allows. Storage pits deepen, paths become familiar, fields spread outward in uneven patches. The first marks of permanence are not always impressive, but they change everything. Once people begin to invest labor into a place, the place begins to demand defense memory and authority. In a landscape where water is never simply abundant, control of it becomes one of the earliest forms of power. A canal is not only a technical achievement, it is a social agreement made visible in earth. Someone must decide where it is dug, who clears it, when silt gathers, who receives water first, who repairs the bank after a flood, who pays labor, who settles disputes when one field drinks while another dries. In wetter lands, power may grow from harvest surplus alone. In drier corridors and border valleys, power grows from the ability to manage uncertainty. A ruler, council, temple, household, or local elite does not need to command a vast empire to become important. It only needs to become necessary. This is where the forgotten region begins to transform from a passage into a system. Settlements that once served travelers and nearby farmers become nodes in a wider web. Grain can be collected and redistributed. Animals can be penned, exchanged, taxed, or sacrificed. Craftspeople can work near supplies of clay, wool, stone, metal ore, or fuel. Pottery becomes more standardized because storage and transport require predictable shapes. Loom weights and spindle whirls accumulate in houses where textile production becomes part of household economy, and perhaps in some places a controlled industry. Small seals or ceilings appear as signs that goods are being counted, closed, authorized, and moved. The evidence remains incomplete, but these objects suggest the rise of trust at a distance, and also the rise of suspicion. Writing where it appears does not begin as poetry about kings. More often it begins with administration deliveries, rations, animals, labor jars, land names. That may seem dry, but it reveals one of the most dramatic changes in human history. A society begins to remember through marks rather than memory alone. Obligations can outlive the spoken agreement. Goods can be tracked beyond the sight of the person who owns them. Officials can act for institutions larger than households. In famous river civilizations, this process becomes monumental, but in the connecting regions, its meaning is especially sharp. To record goods in a crossroads is to participate in movement. A tablet or seal impression from such a place may represent grain grown near by wool from mobile herders, copper from uplands, and orders from a palace far away. Early urban life in these regions often carries a practical character. The cities may not be as large as the great capitals, yet their importance can be disproportionate. A modest walled town near a pass can regulate more strategic movement than a larger settlement in a safer plain. A city at the meeting of routes can become wealthy through exchange without controlling a huge agricultural territory. It may host merchants, guards, scribes, priests, and craftsmen whose work is tied to travellers as much as to local residents. Its streets may contain storage rooms, workshops, shrines, and administrative buildings arranged around needs that are both local and international. What survives in the record suggests that such towns often live with a heightened awareness of the outside world. Their prosperity depends on arrivals. Irrigation gives them stability but not certainty. Canals extend the reach of fields, but they also create dependency. If labour weakens, if conflict interrupts maintenance, if salinity rises in the soil, if upstream users take too much, or if a flood breaks the system, the very achievement that supports urban life becomes a liability. Scholars still debate how much environmental degradation contributed to particular ancient collapses because the evidence varies from site to site and period to period. Yet the general pattern is clear enough. In lands of fragile water, management cities are not simply built on soil. They're built on coordination. When coordination fails, walls and temples cannot eat. A lesser-known detail of early city life is how much it depends on animals. The ancient city is not a purely human machine. Sheep and goats supply wool, meat, milk, hides, and dung. Cattle pull ploughs where conditions allow. Donkeys and later other pack animals make longer-distance trade more reliable. Herds connect the city to pastoral zones beyond its walls. Animal movement brings wealth, but also risk disease, crop damage, conflict over grazing, and the constant need for fodder. In a crossroads region, the animal economy becomes a bridge between settled and mobile worlds. A caravan is not an abstract trade network. It is a line of breathing creatures that must drink rest, be protected, and survive the road. As settlements grow, social differences become more visible. Some houses are larger. Some graves contain richer goods. Some people gain access to imported materials while others live close to subsistence. Administrative buildings imply people who command labour or at least organise it. Fortification suggests threats but also the ability to mobilise workers for collective construction. Temples or shrines create sacred centres where offerings, storage, and authority overlap. No single explanation fully accounts for the emergence of hierarchy in every early city, but in regions of passage inequality often grows around control of water, control of storage, control of trade, control of protection, control of information. Information may be the least visible and most powerful resource of all. A town that knows when caravans will arrive, when a neighbouring ruler is weak, when a river crossing is unsafe, or when metal supplies are delayed can act before others understand what has happened. This does not mean every local leader is a master strategist. Many are probably improvising under pressure, struggling with harvests, debts, rival families, and demands from larger powers. But the location itself gives certain communities unusual awareness. They stand where news travels. Even rumour has value in a world where distance slows command. The first cities of the forgotten region also change the spiritual landscape. Earlier sacred places may be tied to springs, hills, ancestors, animals, or seasonal cycles. Urban life does not erase them. It gathers, formalizes, and sometimes transforms them. A local shrine may become a city temple. A protective deity may become associated with gate storms, fertility war, or trade. Ritual calendars may begin to align with agricultural cycles and political displays. Offerings move through the same storage systems as ordinary goods, though with different meanings. The gods of a crossroads must be able to travel or at least receive strangers. Religion, like trade, becomes a language of connection. Still, these cities are not inevitable success stories. Many remain vulnerable. Some grow for a few centuries and then shrink. Some are destroyed and rebuilt. Some shift location as watercourses change or routes move. Archaeologists often find layered mounds formed by generations of building on the ruins of earlier homes. These mounds are among the quietest and most powerful images of ancient continuity. A city rises because people keep returning to the same place, even after fire, flood, conquest, and decay. Each layer seals the remains of another attempt at permanence. The mound becomes a memory made of earth. The rise of cities in such regions changes the balance of the surrounding world. A road with scattered villages can be difficult to command. A road with fortified towns, storage centres and administrative offices can be taxed, defended, exploited and fought over. The corridor becomes legible to states. Goods can be accumulated in bulk. Labour can be demanded. Diplomacy becomes more formal. Violence becomes more organised. The forgotten region, once valued for passage, now becomes valuable for infrastructure. It is no longer simply crossed. It is governed, negotiated and mapped in the minds of kings. Yet its deepest power remains rooted in the old realities of landscape. The city may build walls, but it still needs fields beyond them. The palace may issue orders, but it still needs water to flow through channels. The temple may claim divine favour, but it still depends on harvest animals and human hands. In these early cities, the fate of later empires is already taking shape. The systems that will one day move armies and treasure begin as canals, storehouses, roads, and agreements among people whose names are mostly lost. The forgotten region awakens not because it suddenly becomes grand, but because it becomes indispensable. It learns how to hold surplus direct movement, translate between worlds, and survive under pressure. Its towns become the knots in a net stretching across the ancient landscape. Pull one knot tight and distant places feel the strain. Cut it and the net begins to loosen. The first cities do not yet control the fate of the world in the full sense, but they create the conditions by which such control becomes possible. They make geography administrative. They make movement profitable. They make water political. And from that moment onward, no great power can look at the region as empty space again. Once the first towns learn how to store grain guard roads and turn water into political order, the region begins to draw in things from far beyond its own fields. At first, the movement may seem modest. A few donkeys carrying woven cloth, a trader with beads and worked stone, a family moving with animals towards seasonal pasture, a messenger bearing a sealed tablet. But over generations these movements become more regular, more ambitious, and more dangerous. The roads of the ancient world are not lines on a map. They are habits worn into land by need. They follow water, avoid marsh climb passes, skirt hostile territory, and stop where food can be bought or demanded. Along them the forgotten region becomes something greater than a landscape. It becomes a hinge in the economy of civilization. Bronze changes the meaning of distance. Copper can be found in many regions, though not always in the richest or easiest deposits. Tin is different. It is rarer, more unevenly distributed, and often far removed from the cities that most desire it. When people discover that copper mixed with tin can produce a stronger and more useful alloy, the demand for distant supply routes intensifies. A plough blade, a dagger, a chisel, a mirror, a spear point a ritual object, a palace fitting. Each may depend on materials that travelled across mountains, deserts, river valleys, and political boundaries. The object may end up in a royal tomb, but its story begins on the road. This is why a corridor region can become powerful without possessing every resource itself. It does not need to be the original source of tin, copper, silver, lapis lazuli, timber horses, or precious textiles. It may become powerful by standing between supply and demand. Merchants and rulers both understand this. A road can enrich a town even when the goods passing through are destined elsewhere. Pack animals must be fed. Travellers need water. Guards require payment. Officials inspect tax or seize. Local markets adapt to foreign traffic. Storage facilities grow. Weights and measures become more important. Seals multiply. A region that controls passage can profit from wealth it did not produce. The Bronze Age world is sometimes imagined as a set of isolated civilizations, each with its own monuments and gods, but the movement of goods reveals a connected system. Mesopotamian cities seek timber and metals from beyond the alluvial plains. Anatolian highlands offer minerals and routes toward the west and north. The Levant links inland powers to the Mediterranean. Egypt desires cedar silver horses and prestige goods from Asia. The Iranian plateau connects worlds still farther east. Across these spaces, forgotten corridor regions become the joints between larger bodies. Their importance is not always visible in later historical memory, but it appears in the distribution of objects, foreign stones, in local graves, imported ceramics in trading towns, seal styles far from their origins, metal goods whose composition points to distant sources. Scholars still debate the exact paths by which some materials travelled, especially tin, because the archaeological and textual evidence remains uneven. Some routes may have shifted over time. Some trade may have moved through many hands, so that no single merchant travelled the entire distance from mine to palace. The person selling metal in one town may not know the name of the mountain where it began. This makes ancient trade both fascinating and difficult to reconstruct. What survives in the record suggests not one simple highway but a flexible web. When one route becomes unsafe, another may gain importance. When one city falls, trade does not necessarily stop. It bends. The people who move through this web are not all wealthy merchants in fine garments. Many are animal handlers, guards, translators, porters, sailors, where rivers or coasts allow scribes, caravan leaders, debtors, servants, and captives. Trade is never only peaceful exchange. It can involve coercion, tribute, diplomatic gifts, plunder, taxation, and forced labour. A palace may describe goods as offerings from a loyal vassal, while the local ruler may experience the same transfer as pressure backed by military threat. A merchant may prosper by crossing borders, but he may also depend on loans, protection, and political favour. No single explanation fully accounts for the balance between private enterprise and state control in every period. The ancient economy is not modern capitalism, but it is also not merely palace command. It is a layered system, and the crossroads holds many of its layers at once. One lesser-known detail is that textiles may have been as important as metals in many trade systems, even though they survive far less often. Woolen cloth, dyed fabrics, and finished garments are portable, valuable, and deeply tied to household labour, palace workshops, and regional identity. Unlike stone or metal, cloth decays, leaving only indirect traces loom, weight, spindle, whirls, administrative texts, impressions, and occasional preserved fragments in exceptional conditions. A caravan loaded with textiles may leave little behind for archaeology, yet in its own time it can represent enormous wealth. The forgotten region may therefore have been richer in movement than its surviving objects suggest. Much of what passed through it has simply vanished into use, decay, and dust. Trade also changes taste. Elites in one region begin to desire materials that signal connection to another. A blue stone from distant mountains, a carved ivory, a cylinder seal, a metal cup, a horse from a renowned breeding zone, a fragrant resin, a foreign style of weapon, each becomes more than an object. It becomes proof that the owner participates in a larger world. Kings use such goods to display reach. Temples use them to honor gods. Local rulers use them to negotiate status with greater powers. A small court in a crossroads region may imitate imperial styles, while keeping local traditions, creating a hybrid art that later archaeologists must interpret carefully. Influence does not always mean conquest. Sometimes it means aspiration, alliance, fashion, or survival. The road creates dependence in both directions. Great kingdoms need the corridor to receive goods, but the corridor also needs the great kingdoms to maintain demand. If a palace economy weakens, luxury trade may decline. If war blocks the road, local markets suffer. If a new route opens elsewhere, towns that once prospered can fade. This makes the region both powerful and exposed. It can control passage, but it cannot fully control the wider system that gives passage value. Its wealth is relational. It exists because distant places need one another. Along these roads, ideas travel in forms that are harder to measure than metal. A technique for making bronze, a way of training horses, a diplomatic formula, a mythic motif, an administrative habit, a style of seal, carving a method of fortification, a ritual object, even a disease can move with people and goods. The Bronze Age world becomes increasingly interdependent, not only because materials circulate, but because practices circulate. The Forgotten region is one of the places where circulation becomes visible. Its people see foreign objects before they become fashionable elsewhere. They hear names of kings before armies arrive. They adopt useful practices and discard others. They are not passive recipients. They choose, adapt, and reinterpret. The rise of long-distance exchange also gives new value to security. A road is only profitable if it can be trusted often enough. Perfect safety does not exist. Bandits, hostile rulers, storms, drought, disease, and animal loss are part of the calculation. But repeated movement requires a predictable degree of order. This may come from treaties, local alliances, fortified stations, kinship ties, temple protections, or payments to groups who control dangerous stretches. In many cases, the same people who threaten a route may also be hired to protect it. The boundary between raider and guard can be thin depending on who is paying. The evidence remains incomplete, but ancient correspondence often reveals anxiety about safe passage, delayed goods, missing messengers, and unreliable allies. As trade grows, writing and measurement become tools of trust and control. Standard weights allow goods to be valued across distance. Seals identify authority or ownership. Tablets record obligations. Contracts bind people who may not fully trust one another. Yet every system of control also creates opportunities for deception. Weights can be altered. Seals can be stolen. Officials can take bribes. Rulers can deny debts. A forgotten region at the center of trade must therefore become skilled not only in exchange, but in managing risk. Its markets are places of calculation as much as abundance. The roads of bronze and tin do not simply enrich the ancient world. They make it vulnerable to disruption. When cities depend on distant materials, local disaster can become international. A mine closes, a pass becomes unsafe. A trading town burns, a drought drives herders into conflict, a king seizes caravans and the effects ripple outward. Weapons become harder to produce, workshops slow, diplomatic gifts fail to arrive, trust weakens. In a connected system, the corridor becomes a pressure point. Whoever controls it can strengthen the world or strangle it. By the height of these exchanges, the Forgotten region is no longer just the land between settled and mobile life, or between water and dry steppe. It is part of a wider machine whose moving parts stretch across continents. Its towns may still seem small beside imperial capitals, but their roads carry the materials from which imperial power is made. Bronze gleams in palace halls because someone keeps the routes open. Royal armies march with weapons shaped by distant awe. Temples receive offerings wrapped in fabrics that pass through many hands. Every shining object has a geography hidden inside it, and this hidden geography is the source of the region's quiet command. It controls not by ruling every destination but by standing where desire must pass. It gathers tolls, rumours, loyalties, dangers and opportunities. Its roads make distant kings dependent on people they may never name. In time, those kings will try to master the corridor directly. They will build forts, send envoys, demand tribute, arrange marriages, and march armies across the same paths once worn by caravans. Wealth invites ambition, and ambition invites conflict. The roads that carry bronze and tin will soon carry royal orders, spies and soldiers. The hinge of trade will become a hinge of power. As wealth begins to move through the corridor, power starts to gather around the people who can interrupt it. The earliest local rulers in such regions may not look grand beside the kings of Egypt, Mesopotamia, or later imperial capitals, but their position gives them a sharp kind of leverage. A ruler who commands a river crossing a mountain past a fortified market town or a chain of wells can influence events far beyond the size of his territory. His land may be narrow, his army may be modest, his palace may be built of mud brick rather than stone. Yet if caravans, envoys, metals, animals and military roads depend on his cooperation, he becomes difficult to ignore. These kings, chiefs, governors and city lords sit on fragile thrones because their authority grows from connection rather than isolation. A ruler in a protected heartland can sometimes survive by drawing on deep agricultural reserves. A ruler at a crossroads must constantly manage the outside world. He must reassure merchants that roads are safe, convince farmers that taxes are tolerable, negotiate with mobile groups whose animals use nearby pastures, placate temples, reward soldiers, and answer the demands of larger states. He may collect tribute one year and pay it the next. He may call himself independent while sending gifts to a stronger king. He may rebel when an empire weakens, then swear loyalty when an army appears on the horizon. This is not necessarily cowardice or treachery. It is the politics of survival in a place too valuable to be left alone. The throne is fragile because the ruler's own people are not his only audience. Every decision is watched by neighbouring powers. If he favours one empire, another may treat him as a threat. If he refuses passage to an army, he risks invasion. If he allows passage, he risks becoming the next target once the army no longer needs him. If he overtaxes trade caravans, may choose another route. If he fails to control raiders, merchants may vanish, and with them the wealth that sustains his court. No single explanation fully accounts for the success or failure of these local rulers, because their fortunes depend on a constantly changing balance of geography, diplomacy, climate, family politics, and force. Fortresses become the visible language of this uncertainty. Across many ancient corridors, archaeologists find walls, towers, gates, citadels, and watchpoints, placed not only around major cities, but along routes and at strategic edges. A wall is often described as protection, but it is also a statement. It announces that movement here is observed, regulated, and potentially denied. Gates are especially important. They are practical openings, but also places where authority performs itself. Goods can be inspected. Travellers can be questioned. Taxes can be collected. Messages can be received. A city gate may be where local justice is heard, where elders gather, where soldiers stand, and where strangers first encounter the power of the town. The material record often shows a mixture of ambition and anxiety. Thick walls suggest organised labour and fear of attack. Storerooms suggest planning, but also the need to accumulate resources before uncertainty arrives. Administrative ceilings imply systems of control. Imported luxury goods reveal participation in wider networks. Burn layers sometimes show sudden violence, though scholars still debate whether every destruction layer should be linked to war invasion, accident, internal revolt, or environmental stress. Archaeology rarely gives a single clean answer. A burned palace may mean conquest. It may also mean local conflict, earthquake damage followed by fire or abandonment after crisis. The evidence remains incomplete, but the pattern of repeated fortification and rebuilding suggests that life at the crossroads is rarely calm for long. Diplomacy is the other wall these rulers build. A small kingdom in a vital region may survive not by defeating great powers, but by making itself useful to them. It can provide troops, guides, intelligence, horses, grain, timber, metals, or safe passage. It can serve as a buffer between rivals. It can host envoys and transmit messages. It can marry into stronger dynasties or send royal children as hostages to guarantee loyalty. In the polished language of ancient diplomacy, these arrangements may appear as friendship, brotherhood, or service. Beneath that language lies pressure. A local ruler knows that a treaty is only as strong as the balance of power behind it. One lesser-known but important detail is that royal hostages and diplomatic marriages are not merely symbols. They are mechanisms for managing trust in a world where communication is slow and betrayal can be catastrophic. A prince raised at a foreign court may return home with new habits, new loyalties, and new suspicions. A princess married into another dynasty may carry not only family prestige, but also religious practices, servants, objects, and political expectations. Such people become living bridges between states and sometimes living fault lines. Their presence reveals how deeply personal ancient geopolitics can be. The fate of a corridor may depend on relationships formed in bedrooms, banquet halls, nurseries, and hostage quarters as much as on battlefields. The ruler's palace, if the town has one, is therefore not just a residence. It is a place where goods, information, ritual, and fear converge. Grain from local fields may be stored beside imported metal. Scribes may record deliveries from villages and gifts from distant courts. Craftspeople may produce objects meant to display authority. Priests may bless the ruler's legitimacy while soldiers wait for pay. Envoys may be welcomed with ceremony, watched closely, and sent away with carefully chosen gifts. The palace must appear stable even when the ruler knows how unstable his position truly is. This tension can produce remarkable cultural richness. Local courts often adopt symbols from powerful neighbours while preserving distinct traditions. A seal might use a foreign artistic motif but carry a local name. A palace layout may imitate an imperial style while incorporating older regional practices. A ruler may worship local gods and also honour the gods of a stronger ally. To modernize, this can look like cultural confusion. In reality, it may be political intelligence. The court is speaking several languages of power at once. It must be recognizable to outsiders without losing authority at home. Yet the same strategy can create resentment. Local elites may benefit from trade and diplomacy while ordinary farmers carry the burden of taxes, labor, and military service. Fortification projects require workers. Caravans need supplies. Armies passing through can consume fields, seize animals, and spread disease. A ruler caught between imperial demands and local survival may squeeze his own people harder than they can endure. Some rebellions probably begin not with grand ideology, but with exhaustion, too much grain taken, too many men conscripted, too many promises broken. What survives in the record often comes from elites, so the suffering beneath political decisions can be difficult to hear clearly. It is still there, pressed into abandoned houses, malnutrition in bones, hurried burials, and villages that shrink while palaces boast. Local rulers also face the problem of legitimacy. In old heartlands, kingship can be wrapped in deep traditions, sacred myths, and long dynastic claims. At the crossroads, authority may change hands more often. A family rises by controlling trade, then loses power after a military defeat. A governor appointed by an empire tries to rule people who remember older kings. A military commander becomes a local dynasty. A city council cooperates with one foreign power to resist another. Scholars still debate how formal and centralized some of these governments were, especially in periods where written evidence is thin. But even when kingship is modest, the need for recognized authority remains strong. Roads require guarantees. Treaties require signatories. Temples require patrons. Armies require commanders. The fragility of these thrones does not make them unimportant. It makes them pivotal. A local ruler may determine whether a great army marches smoothly, or spends weeks fighting through fortified towns. He may decide whether tin reaches a bronze workshop, whether horses reach a royal stable, whether a rebel prince finds shelter, whether an imperial messenger is protected or killed. The great kings may write history as if they alone act, but their ambitions pass through the hands of smaller powers. A vast empire can be delayed by a narrow pass. A royal campaign can fail because supplies do not arrive. A trade network can shift because one local dynasty collapses. The forgotten region thus becomes a chessboard where the pieces are never fully obedient. Empires may imagine local kings as pawns, but pawns at a crossroads can block the board. They can bargain, delayed effect, mislead, or endure. Their power is not absolute and often not long-lasting, but it is real. It lies in the ability to make geography political. A hill becomes a fortress. A ford becomes a tax point. A market becomes a diplomatic stage. A family alliance becomes a road policy. A canal becomes a claim to rule. Over time, the ambitions of these local rulers attract the attention of powers too large to tolerate uncertainty. The richer the corridor becomes, the more dangerous its independence appears. Great states prefer routes that answer to them directly. They want tribute without negotiation armies, without obstruction, and intelligence without delay. The fragile kings of the crossroads may profit from balancing rivals, but balance is hardest to maintain when one rival decides to absorb the board itself. The same roads that made local thrones wealthy begin to bring imperial armies closer. The region has become too important to remain merely local, and that is when its fate enters a harsher age. The great empires do not come to the corridor by accident. They are pulled there by the same forces that once enriched its towns and strengthened its fragile kings. A river kingdom can grow fat on its own harvest for a time, but expansion changes appetite. Armies need roads. Palaces need metals. Chariot forces need horses and wood. Temples need prestige goods. Governors need secure lines of communication. Merchants need predictable protection. A king who claims to rule the four corners of the world cannot allow the most important routes beyond his reach to remain in the hands of uncertain allies. Sooner or later, the crossroads becomes an imperial obsession. This is the age when the region turns from a hinge of trade into a magnet for conquest. Larger powers look at it and see several things at once. They see wealth passing through. They see enemies who might also pass through. They see local rulers who can defect. They see fortresses that can block campaigns. They see agricultural pockets that can feed troops. They see mountain approaches, river crossings, desert wells, and roads leading toward rival states. To control the corridor is not simply to own land. It is to shorten distance, reduce surprise, and deny opportunities to others. It is strategy made geographic. The logic is harsh but clear. If one empire does not control the region, another may. If the region remains divided among local rulers, it may become a shelter for rebels, raiders, displaced princes, and hostile envoys. If trade passes through, without imperial supervision, wealth escapes taxation. If border towns change allegiance, the empire's edge becomes porous. This is why powerful states repeatedly describe frontier campaigns as necessary acts of order. They claim to pacify, protect, punish, restore, or civilize. Beneath the official language lies a simpler truth. They cannot trust a crossroads they do not command. Imperial conquest changes the rhythm of life, but rarely in a single uniform way. Some cities resist and are destroyed or punished. Others surrender quickly and preserve a measure of a local privilege. Some rulers are removed and replaced by governors. Others remain in place as vassals, keeping their titles while sending tribute troops, daughters, sons, and loyalty to a greater king. Inscriptions may present this as the natural submission of lesser peoples, but the lived reality is often negotiation under threat. What survives in the record suggests that imperial control is not just imposed from above, it must be maintained constantly through roads, garrisons, officials, marriages, gifts, fear, and the careful management of local elites. One lesser-known detail is how often empire depends on inherited local knowledge. A conquering king may boast that he has opened roads and subdued mountains, but his army still needs guides. His governors still need interpreters. His tax collectors must learn who owns fields, who controls flocks, which shrine matters, which clan can disrupt a route, and which old rivalry can be exploited. Empire often presents itself as a machine, but on the ground it is full of improvisation. It absorbs local systems because it cannot replace them all at once. The forgotten region is conquered, yet it also teaches the conqueror how it must be ruled. This is one reason imperial maps can be misleading. A province may appear securely coloured in the shade of a great kingdom, while inside it older loyalties continue to operate. A town may pay tribute and still dream of revolt. A local family may serve the empire while preserving its own networks. A temple may honour the imperial ruler and continue older rituals. A road may be patrolled by imperial troops but still depend on agreements with mobile groups who know the wells and grazing lands. No single explanation fully accounts for why some imperial systems endure and others fail, but successful rule in a corridor almost always requires compromise. Force opens the gate. Administration keeps it from closing again. The empires are drawn not only by trade but by fear. A corridor can become an invasion route in both directions. A land that allows merchants to pass can also allow armies to pass. The same valley that carries tin and textiles can carry chariots, siege equipment, cavalry, or columns of infantry. A great power that controls a rich heartland may therefore seek the corridor as a shield. It wants strategic depth. It wants warning time. It wants enemies stopped before they reach the core. But once it pushes outward to secure the frontier, it meets another power doing the same from the opposite direction. The buffer becomes a battleground. This pattern repeats across centuries. Empires expand toward one another until the in-between land can no longer remain in between. Local rulers who once balanced rival powers find themselves squeezed by demands too heavy to satisfy. One empire requires tribute and loyalty. Another offers protection or threatens destruction. A city that chooses wrongly may be punished. A city that waits too long may be treated as treacherous by both sides. In such moments, the region's old skill at mediation becomes dangerous. The very flexibility that once preserved independence can appear as betrayal when imperial patience runs out. The presence of empire brings new infrastructure. Roads may be repaired or formalized. Fortresses may be expanded. Administrative centers may be built. Messengers may move through relay systems. Military colonies or garrisons may appear. Storage facilities may grow to support campaigns. Standardized measures, seals, scripts, and taxes may spread. These changes can bring stability and prosperity to some. Trade may become safer under a strong imperial umbrella. Local elites may gain access to larger markets and prestigious offices. Craftspeople may find new patrons. Not every experience of empire is simple oppression, but stability has a cost, and the cost is obedience. For ordinary people, imperial rule may be felt most directly through labor and extraction. Fields are counted, animals are assessed. Sons may be taken for military service or labor projects. Grain may be requisitioned to feed troops. Towns may be required to house officials or soldiers. Roads that bring merchants also bring tax collectors. A canal repaired under imperial order may improve agriculture, but the labor may be forced. A fortress that protects the region may also remind its inhabitants that rebellion will be answered quickly. The evidence remains incomplete because peasants rarely leave their own written accounts, but settlement patterns, storage systems, and skeletal remains can suggest the pressure of larger political demands. The imperial appetite also reshapes local identity. People who once thought of themselves primarily through city clan language or shrine may now be categorized as subjects of a province. Names are written in foreign administrative forms. Taxes are assigned according to imperial needs. Local gods may be associated with imperial gods. Young men serving in imperial armies may travel far from home and return with new habits, or never return at all. Merchants may benefit from wider peace while becoming dependent on distant politics. The crossroads becomes more connected than ever, but less free to define the terms of connection. Yet empire does not erase the older power of the region. In some ways, it increases it. Once an imperial state invests in roads, forts, canals, and administrative stations, the corridor becomes even more essential. More troops move through it. More messages depend on it. More taxes are collected there. More rivals target it. A rebellion in such a province can now threaten not only local order, but imperial communication. A failed harvest can affect campaign planning. A defeated garrison can expose a heartland. The region becomes integrated into the empire's nervous system. Damage there is felt far away. This is the paradox of imperial control. The empire seeks the corridor to reduce vulnerability, but by incorporating it, the empire makes itself dependent on the very land it feared. It must defend longer borders. It must manage more diverse peoples. It must keep supply lines open across difficult terrain. It must respond to local crises that earlier might have remained outside its system. Expansion solves one problem by creating several others. Scholars still debate how often overextension contributed to particular imperial collapses, and the answer differs from case to case. But in every large state, distance has a cost, and the crossroads sends the bill. The local rulers who survive within imperial structures adapt. Some become loyal governors wearing imperial titles while ruling through older networks. Some quietly preserve local ambitions, waiting for the empire to weaken. Some send children to imperial courts and receive foreign education. Some use imperial support to defeat local rivals. Their thrones remain fragile, but now their fragility is tied to the fortunes of a much larger world. A revolt in a distant capital, a succession crisis, a failed campaign, or a drought in another province can suddenly open space for action. The corridor watches as it always has for movement. In this age, the forgotten region becomes a test of imperial realism. Kings can claim universal dominion, but they must still face the stubborn details of terrain. A mountain pass does not care about royal titles. A dry well does not respect imperial ideology. A town whose people know every track through the hills may resist longer than expected. A caravan delayed by insecurity may weaken palace confidence. The land continues to impose conditions. It allows power to pass only when power understands it. The great empires are therefore drawn to the region not only because it is valuable, but because it is revealing. It exposes the difference between claiming control and possessing it. It shows whether a state can project force, organize supply, negotiate diversity, and absorb local knowledge without being consumed by the effort. Many can conquer, fewer can hold. Fewer still can hold without exhausting the systems that made conquest possible. By the time imperial banners rise over the crossroads, the old world of local thrones has not vanished completely, but it has changed shape. The roads that once enriched small courts now carry the ambitions of kings who imagine the whole world as their inheritance. Fortresses stare across contested horizons, messengers ride with urgent tablets, governors count grain, merchants calculate risk under new flags. The corridor has become the prize no empire can ignore and the burden no empire can easily bear. By the time empires begin to pull the corridor into their own designs, the roads are no longer used only by traders and soldiers. They become channels of information suspicion ceremony and quiet manipulation. Caravans still move with animals and goods, but beside them, travel envoys carrying royal messages, scribes guarding sealed tablets, interpreters listening carefully to every word, spies disguised as merchants, hostages sent to distant courts, and messengers whose safe arrival can decide whether a war begins or is delayed. The forgotten region becomes a world of movement, but not all movement is visible in the same way. Some of its most important traffic is made of promises. Ancient diplomacy depends on distance, and distance is dangerous. A ruler cannot simply speak across a continent. He must send a person a tablet, a gift, a threat, or a marriage proposal through lands where weather bandits rival kings, suspicious governors, and local politics can interfere. Every diplomatic message is therefore an act of trust in the road. A sealed tablet may contain instructions, complaints, alliances, demands for tribute warnings about enemies, or delicate negotiations over royal marriages. It may travel through towns that have their own interests in the message's success or failure. A delay may be innocent, but it may also be strategic. In the corridor, time itself becomes political. Merchants understand this world better than most. They're not merely sellers of goods, they're carriers of knowledge. A merchant who travels between courts learns which king is sick, which prince is ambitious, which city is underfed, which road is unsafe, which official can be bribed, and which border has become tense. Some merchants likely act as informal diplomats because they already possess the networks that envoys need. Others may serve palaces directly moving goods under royal protection. Some work privately but depend on official favour. Scholars still debate how sharply one can separate merchant agent and state servant in many ancient contexts. The evidence remains incomplete, but the overlap is clear enough. In a world where information travels with people, trade, and politics cannot be fully separated, the caravan itself is a small moving society. It requires planning, discipline, and knowledge. Animals must be loaded carefully, water stops must be calculated, guards must be hired or negotiated, goods must be packed to survive heat, dust, river crossings, and rough tracks. Documents must be protected from theft or damage. A caravan leader has to read landscapes and people with equal skill. The wrong camp can mean robbery. The wrong insult can mean the loss of local protection. The wrong season can turn a manageable road into a death trap. What appears on a tablet as a delivery of metal or cloth may conceal weeks or months of fragile decisions. The roads also carry human beings as objects of policy. Hostages are among the most revealing figures in this world. A royal child, a noble relative, or the son of a local ruler may be sent to a greater court as a guarantee of loyalty. Officially, such a person may be honored, educated, and treated according to rank. In reality, the arrangement contains a threat. If the local ruler rebels, the hostage's life or future may be endangered. Yet hostages can also become powerful bridges. They learn the language and customs of the court that holds them. They form friendships and dependencies. They may return home with foreign habits, foreign allies, and a changed sense of what power looks like. No single explanation fully accounts for the effect of such lives, because each hostage is both a person and a political instrument. Royal women often move through the same diplomatic landscape, though the surviving records may reduce them to marriage arrangements and dowries. A princess sent across the corridor carries more than her body into a foreign dynasty. She brings attendants, goods, ritual expectations, family connections, and sometimes claims that later become politically useful. Her marriage may seal peace, confirm vassalage, or create a line of influence inside another court. If she writes letters or manages property, she may become a participant in diplomacy, rather than a passive symbol. The record is uneven, and many women disappear behind the formal language of male rulers, but what survives suggests that royal marriage is one of the corridor's most intimate forms of geopolitics. Spies are harder to see by design. Ancient texts do mention scouts, informants, messengers, deserters, and people who report on enemy movements, but much intelligence work leaves no neat archaeological trace. Still, any contested corridor must produce espionage. Armies need to know whether passes are open, whether fortresses are provisioned, whether local rulers are loyal, whether enemy troops are gathering, and whether a road can support a campaign. A trader may notice military preparations before an official envoy does. A servant in a palace may hear what a governor wants hidden. A guide may exaggerate dangers to benefit one side. The boundary between rumour and intelligence can be thin, but in a slow-moving world, even rumour may be valuable. Treaties try to make trust durable. They name obligations, witnesses, gods, borders, tribute military assistance, extradition, marriage promises, or trade conditions. They may be sealed with oaths and curses calling divine punishment upon those who break them. This sacred language matters. In a world without international courts, the gods become guarantors of political order. Yet treaties are also fragile because circumstances change. A drought weakens one party, a king dies, a rival empire rises, a fortress falls, a caravan is attacked and blame becomes disputed. The old words remain, but the balance behind them shifts. The corridor is full of such shifting balances and treaties. There must constantly fight against geography's restlessness. A lesser-known detail of ancient diplomacy is the importance of gifts that are not quite gifts. Royal letters often frame exchanges as friendship, honour, or kinship, but gifts can also be demands, payments, tests, or disguised tribute. Gold horses, textiles, lapis lazuli weapons, carved vessels, and skilled artisans may move under the language of generosity. If one ruler sends too little, the other may read insult. If he sends too much, he may appear subordinate. In the corridor where local rulers stand between greater powers, gift exchange becomes precise art. A wrong object can send the wrong message. A delayed gift can suggest rebellion. A magnificent gift can buy time. Scribes are the quiet technicians of this world. They know formulas of address, diplomatic titles, measures, names, and the proper way to shape authority into writing. A scribe in a crossroads town may need to handle several languages or scripts, or at least understand the conventions of different political spheres. His work gives permanence to fragile arrangements. He records deliveries, copies, letters, seals, tablets, and preserves the official memory of promises. Yet the scribe is not merely a machine. The wording of a letter can soften a threat, sharpen a complaint, or preserve ambiguity. In a world of kings, the hand that writes may subtly influence what power sounds like. The ordinary inhabitants of the corridor feel these high politics in practical ways. When envoys arrive, they need lodging food, animals, escorts, and ceremony. When messengers pass, roads must be kept safe. When treaties fail, armies arrive. When tribute is demanded, fields and workshops pay. A village may not know the full content of a royal letter, but it may feel the result in taxes or requisitioned animals. A town may profit from diplomatic traffic selling supplies and services, yet also fear the attention that traffic brings. The road brings wealth, but it never brings only wealth. There is also a psychological dimension to life in such a region. People become accustomed to watching the horizon. A dust cloud may mean merchants, soldiers, refugees, or raiders. A foreign language in the marketplace may mean opportunity or danger. News is weighed carefully because survival depends on interpretation. The corridor teaches suspicion, flexibility, and memory. Families remember which empire punished rebellion, which governor was fair, which alliance brought famine, which road became unsafe after a battle. These memories rarely enter royal inscriptions, but they shape behavior over generations. Caravan spies and treaties make the forgotten region more than a passageway. They make it a nervous system. Goods are the blood, but information is the pulse. The great capitals may issue commands, but the corridor determines how quickly those commands move, how they are understood, and whether they are obeyed. A message delayed by weather, stolen by enemies, altered by a scribe, or ignored by a local ruler can change the timing of history. A trade mission may reveal weakness. A hostage may become a future king. A treaty may hold just long enough to prevent disaster or fail just soon enough to unleash it. What survives in the record suggests a world that is both highly connected and deeply uncertain. Ancient states know far more about one another than older models of isolated civilizations once assumed, yet they never know enough to feel secure. The corridor feeds that connection and that insecurity at the same time. It allows rulers to reach across distance, but it also reminds them that distance cannot be abolished. Every road passes through human hands. Every seal can be broken. Every promise must survive the journey. And so the Forgotten Region becomes a theatre of quiet drama before open violence begins. The clatter of pack animals, the scratching of styluses, the formal greetings of envoys, the guarded silence of hostages, the careful exchange of gifts, the concealed work of informants, all of these prepare the ground on which armies later march. Empires may appear to collide suddenly, but their collisions are often preceded by years of messages, bargains, suspicions, and small betrayals, moving along the same roads. The fate of the world is not decided only when swords are drawn. It is also decided when a tablet reaches the wrong hands, when a caravan chooses a safer route, when a local ruler delays his answer, and when the corridor quietly reveals that trust has begun to fail. The systems built around the corridor are strong only while the land continues to cooperate. Roads can be guarded, treaties can be sealed, forts can be repaired, and tribute can be counted, but none of these can command the rain. In regions where fields, pastures, wells, and canals sit close to the edge of scarcity, climate is not a distant background condition. It is an actor in history. A few good years can fill storehouses in large herds and encourage kings to promise more than the land can always provide. A sequence of dry years can expose the weakness hidden beneath prosperity. The Forgotten Region, powerful because it connects worlds, becomes vulnerable because every connected system carries stress outward, Drought does not need to destroy a civilization instantly to change its fate. More often it works by narrowing choices. A farmer with enough grain can pay tax fee to household keep seed for the next planting, and perhaps exchange surplus in a market. A farmer under pressure must choose. Food seed rent, debt temple dues, palace demand, military requisition, and family survival begin to compete with one another. A herder facing poor pasture must move farther, sell animals, early raid fields, seek new agreements, or risk losing the herd. A town that depends on passing caravans may suffer when wells fail along the road, or when insecurity makes merchants delay their journeys. The first signs of crisis may be quiet, smaller harvests, thinner animals, abandoned outlying fields, more disputes over water, fewer goods arriving from distant places. In a corridor region, these local stresses rarely remain local. A dry season in upland pasture can push mobile groups towards settled valleys. A failed harvest near a key route can reduce supplies for caravans and armies. A river that shifts course or floods unpredictably can damage canals, forcing communities to spend labour on repair when they're already weakened. Wells that once sustained long-distance movement may become unreliable. A state may respond by demanding more from surviving productive areas, which can make those areas resentful or exhausted. No single explanation fully accounts for every ancient crisis, but environmental stress often acts like pressure applied to a cracked vessel. It does not create every crack, yet it reveals them. The evidence for ancient climate shifts comes from many sources, none perfect alone. Lake sediments can preserve signs of changing water levels. Cave formations can record variations in rainfall through chemical traces. Pollen can suggest changes in vegetation. Tree rings, where available, may show years of stress or growth. Archaeological surveys can reveal settlement contraction, abandonment or movement toward more reliable water. Written records sometimes mention famine, failed harvests, high grain prices, or desperate appeals for food, though such texts must be read carefully. Royal inscriptions may exaggerate a king's rescue of his people. Administrative tablets may show shortages without explaining their causes. Scholars still debate the timing, severity, and regional variation of many ancient droughts because climate does not strike every valley in the same way. This unevenness matters. A drought that ruins one district may leave another damaged but functioning. A river-fed field may survive while rain-fed agriculture fails. Pastoralists may suffer in one season and recover in another if mobility remains possible. The corridor's diversity, once a source of resilience, can also become a source of tension. People move towards surviving resources. Those already there may resist. Agreements that worked in ordinary years break under extraordinary pressure. A well becomes political. A canal intake becomes a point of conflict. A pasture becomes worth fighting over. The forgotten region's old skill at negotiation is tested by the simplest and hardest question: who gets to drink, plant, graze, and stay? Water control, which helped early cities awaken, becomes a burden when maintenance falters. Canals are living systems. They silt up breach, evaporate, and sometimes spread salts through fields if poorly managed over time. In some areas, irrigation can support dense settlement for centuries. In others, it requires constant adjustment. When central authority weakens, canal labour may become harder to organise. When war interrupts, farming repairs may be delayed. When drought reduces flow downstream, communities may accuse upstream users of theft. What survives in the records suggests that ancient people understood water management deeply, but understanding does not eliminate conflict. A system can be technically clever and politically fragile at the same time. A lesser-known consequence of environmental stress is its effect on trust. Trade networks depend not only on roads but on expectations. Merchants need to believe that goods will be available, prices will be meaningful, debts will be honoured, and protection will hold. Drought disrupts all of these. Grain becomes more expensive. Animals become weaker. Local rulers may seize supplies in the name of emergency. Banditry may increase as hungry people lose ordinary livelihoods. Empires may intensify taxation to maintain armies and courts, even when the countryside can bear less. A caravan leader deciding whether to risk a road is making a climate decision as much as a commercial one. The land's dryness enters the accounts. Environmental pressure also affects politics at the top. A king who once seemed favoured by the gods may appear suddenly unable to protect the harvest. Temples may receive fewer offerings. Palaces may spend stored grain to prevent unrest, or hoard it and deepen resentment. Local rulers may blame foreign enemies, disloyal subjects, corrupt officials, or divine anger. Great powers may interpret weakness in a corridor as an opportunity. If a drought-strained region cannot defend its forts, an empire may invade. If an empire itself is weakened by climate stress, local rulers may rebel. Climate does not replace human ambition. It changes the timing and cost of ambition. People respond with movement. Some migrations are probably small and seasonal, barely visible in archaeology. Others may leave clearer traces: abandoned villages, new settlement clusters, changes in pottery, different burial customs, or textual references to displaced groups. It is risky to turn every movement into an invasion, and scholars rightly warn against imagining ancient populations as simple waves crashing across maps. Yet mobility is a normal human response to stress. Families move toward kin rivers, cities, temples, employers, armies, or empty land. Pastoral groups adjust routes. Refugees follow roads that traders already know. The corridor built for movement becomes a channel for desperation as well as commerce. This is where climate and conflict begin to reinforce one another. A drought weakens harvests. Weak harvests reduce revenue. Reduced revenue limits a ruler's ability to pay soldiers or maintain walls. Insecurity increases, trade declines. Declining trade reduces wealth further. People move. Movement creates disputes. Disputes invite military response. Military response consumes grain. The cycle is not inevitable, and some societies manage stress better than others, but the pattern is familiar enough to appear across many ancient crises. The forgotten region is especially exposed because it cannot seal itself off. Its openness is its strength in good times and its vulnerability in bad ones. Still, it would be too simple to say that drought alone brings collapse. Ancient societies are not dry grass waiting for one spark. They contain reserves, traditions of adaptation, flexible economies and communities capable of endurance. Some towns survive harsh periods by shrinking rather than disappearing. Some roots shift and later return. Some local rulers gain power precisely because larger systems fail. No single explanation fully accounts for the transformation of the corridor under climate stress. What can be said is that environmental change makes every other problem more severe. It turns rivalry sharper, taxation heavier, diplomacy more urgent, and ordinary survival more uncertain. In the archaeological record, this uncertainty may appear as silence. A site once occupied for centuries becomes thin in remains. Imported goods decline. Storage patterns change. Fortifications are repaired in haste. Rural settlements vanish while larger towns persist behind walls. Animal bones may suggest altered diets or herd management. Charred grain in a destruction layer may mark violence, accident, or emergency storage lost to fire. Each clue is partial. Together they form the image of a region under strain, not necessarily dying but changing shape. The human reality behind these traces is quieter and more painful. A family leaves a house built by grandparents because the fields no longer yield enough. A herder sells breeding animals that should have secured the next generation. A village sends more grain to a fortress while eating less at home. A merchant arrives at a market and finds no buyers with silver, no sellers with surplus, and rumours of raids on the northern road. A local ruler receives an imperial demand for tribute and knows that compliance may starve his people, while refusal may bring an army. History often records the army. Archaeology sometimes records the hunger. As climate shifts, the corridor's power does not vanish. It becomes more dangerous. Control of movement matters even more when resources are scarce. Wells, rivers, storehouses, and roads become strategic assets in a harsher sense. Empires may fight harder for them. Local groups may defend them more desperately. The region still controls the fate of the world, but now it does so through crisis. It determines who can flee, who can trade, who can invade, who can eat, and who is trapped. The old roads of bronze and tin remain, but their meaning darkens. A caravan road can become a refugee path. A fortified trading town can become a military depot. A treaty route can become an invasion corridor. The same geography that once allowed civilizations to enrich one another now allows their troubles to spread. Climate shifts do not end the story by themselves. They prepare the ground for the next turn when stress at the crossroads becomes collapse, and the fragile systems binding the ancient world begin to break under the weight of too many demands at once. Collapse at the crossroads rarely arrives as a single moment. It is not one wall falling, one king dying, one army crossing a border, or one harvest failing. It is the slow convergence of pressures that once seemed survivable on their own. A drought weakens the fields. A trade route becomes unsafe. A local ruler changes sides. A fortress is attacked. A palace demands tribute that can no longer be paid. Villages move closer to walled towns. Herders press into cultivated land. Merchants delay journeys. Messengers bring news that sounds less like information and more like warning. Then at some point the old systems stop absorbing shocks. The corridor which once held worlds together begins to transmit fracture. The Great Crisis is most visible in destruction layers, abandoned settlements, broken trade patterns, and the sudden disappearance or transformation of political names. Yet even these traces are difficult to interpret. Archaeologists may find a burned city gate and know that violence occurred, but not always who caused it or why. A palace may be destroyed while nearby villages continue in changed form. Imported goods may vanish from a site, but this may mean trade collapse, shifting taste, political isolation, or simply the loss of elite demand. Scholars still debate the relative weight of invasion rebellion, climate stress, economic failure, and internal political weakness in many ancient collapses. The evidence remains incomplete, and the more carefully it is studied, the less satisfying any single explanation becomes. At a crossroads collapse can begin with the breakdown of confidence. A trader who no longer trusts a route may not need proof of disaster. Rumour is enough. If caravans stop moving through one town, its markets shrink. If markets shrink, rulers collect less revenue. If revenue falls, guards go unpaid. If guards vanish, the road becomes more dangerous, confirming the original fear. This is how a system can unravel without one dramatic catastrophe. The corridor depends on repeated trust, and repeated trust is fragile. It takes generations to build a road into an institution, but only a few seasons of insecurity to make people seek another path. Warfare accelerates the unraveling. In a region where every pass, ford and well has strategic value, armies do not simply pass through, they consume. They require grain, animals, labour, timber, water and shelter. Even when they belong to a supposed protector, their presence can devastate local communities. Fields are trampled or harvested early, flocks are seized, young men are conscripted, storehouses are emptied. Siege warfare where it occurs is especially destructive because it concentrates hunger and fear behind walls. A town may survive the assault but lose the countryside that sustained it. A victory inscription may celebrate conquest while the land itself pays the cost for years. Invasions are often remembered because they are vivid, but in a corridor they may be symptoms as much as causes. Mobile groups displaced populations. Ambitious warlords and imperial armies move most easily when older structures are already weakened. A drought-strained frontier, a bankrupt local dynasty, or a distracted empire creates openings. People who appear in one record as invaders may from another perspective be migrants, mercenaries, refugees, raiders, or political opportunists. Ancient texts written by settled states tend to flatten these distinctions. They turn complex human movement into names of enemies. Modern scholarship is more cautious because the archaeological record often shows mixture rather than simple replacement. One lesser-known feature of collapse is continuity beneath political ruin. A palace may burn, a dynasty may vanish, and an imperial archive may stop, yet many ordinary practices continue. People still cook, bury their dead herd animals, repair houses, and cultivate whatever land remains usable. Pottery styles may change gradually rather than abruptly. Local shrines may persist even after royal temples lose patronage. A city may contract into a smaller fortified area instead of disappearing. This matters because collapse is not the end of human life. It is the end of a particular arrangement of power. For the people living through it, the question is not whether civilization has fallen. It is whether tomorrow there is enough food safety and hope to remain. Still, the effects can be vast. When the corridor fails, distant centers feel the loss. Metals become harder to obtain. Horses may not arrive. Diplomatic contact weakens. Luxury goods disappear from elite contexts. Military campaigns become riskier. Provinces lose communication with capitals. A great state that once projected authority across long distances may find its reach shortening. It still claims power, but the roads no longer obey. In this way, a regional crisis becomes a world crisis. The forgotten region controls fate not by commanding empires, but by revealing how dependent empires are on connection. The collapse also exposes the limits of writing. Archives are often products of administration, and administration is one of the things that breaks. When a palace burns, the tablets may be fired hard enough to survive, preserving the last anxious records of a failing system. But if an office is abandoned quietly, its documents may decay. If scribal institutions collapse, fewer records are produced at the very moment historians most want them. Silence in the record can mean many things: depopulation, decentralization, a shift to perishable writing materials, the loss of elite bureaucracy, or simply excavation not yet done. What survives in the record suggests crisis, but it also reminds us that collapse makes itself harder to see clearly. In many crossroads regions, fortification becomes more intense during unstable periods. Walls are repaired, gates, narrowed towers strengthened, storage moved inward. Such measures suggest fear, but fear of what exactly can be hard to identify. Raiders rival cities, imperial armies, displaced groups, local rebels, or hungry neighbors may all threaten the same town. A community under pressure may not distinguish neatly between external and internal danger. The world outside the wall becomes uncertain. The wall becomes not only a defense but a psychological boundary, a way of saying that the old open landscape of movement has become too dangerous to trust. Economic life becomes more local as long-distance systems weaken. This does not mean all trade stops. People always exchange. But the scale, regularity and prestige of trade may decline. Local materials replace imported ones. Regional styles become less cosmopolitan. Elite consumption shrinks or changes. Workshops that once depended on distant supply may close, adapt, or produce simpler goods. The loss of imported luxury items may seem minor compared with hunger or war, but luxury goods are part of political communication. When rulers can no longer distribute gifts, reward followers, sponsor temples, or display connection to distant powers, their authority weakens. The glitter of prestige is not superficial in a world where status holds alliances together. The spiritual effects are harder to trace, but they must have been profound. When cities fall, people do not only lose walls and markets, they lose ritual calendars, sacred processions, ancestral tombs, temple economies, and the confidence that the gods protect a known order. Some communities may interpret disaster as divine anger. Others may cling more strongly to local cults. Some gods travel with refugees and captives entering new landscapes. Religious traditions may survive political collapse by becoming portable, adaptable, and embedded in households rather than palaces. No single explanation fully accounts for the religious transformations that follow crisis, but crossroads regions are likely places for them to intensify. People in motion carry gods with them. The human cost appears in small traces that resist grand narration. A hurried burial outside a usual cemetery, a storage jar hidden under a floor and never recovered, a house abandoned with tools still inside, a child's remains showing signs of nutritional stress, a rural settlement left to weather back into soil. These are not always easy to date or interpret, but they give collapse a human scale. The fate of the world is built from such losses. Empires fall in history books, but households fall in silence. At the same time, collapse can create new powers. When imperial systems weaken, local leaders may gain room to act. Former subjects become kings. Fortified towns become centers of new polities. Mobile groups may settle rule or merge with existing communities. Trade routes may reorient toward different markets. Technologies and military practices may spread through disruption. The corridor does not simply die, it reorganizes. The old order breaks, but the geography remains. Roads may be dangerous for a generation, then revive under new names. A ruined palace mound may become a quarry for later builders. A fallen frontier may become the heartland of a future kingdom. This is why collapse at the crossroads is both an ending and a transformation. The region's earlier power depended on connecting stable systems. During crisis, it connects unstable ones. It channels refugees, soldiers, goods, rumors, diseases, and new identities. It allows destruction to spread, but also survival. People who flee through it may carry skills to other lands. Artisans displaced by war may serve new patrons. Scribes from fallen courts may preserve administrative traditions elsewhere. Pastoralists adapting to changed conditions may become political actors. The collapse of one order becomes the seedbed of another. From the viewpoint of a great empire, the loss of the corridor may look like disaster. From the viewpoint of the land itself, it is another rearrangement of movement. The rivers still seek their beds. The passes still cut through mountains. The wells still matter. The ruins of one age become landmarks for the next. Yet for those who live through the breaking, there is no comfort in long perspective. There is only the immediate uncertainty of roads no longer safe rulers, no longer reliable fields, no longer secure, and old promises no longer believed. The forgotten region once helped make the ancient world possible by holding its connections together. In collapse, it shows the price of that interdependence. A world tied by roads can prosper through roads, but it can also fail through them. When climate pressure, warfare, political distrust, and economic fragility meet in the same corridor, the crisis does not remain contained. It travels. It moves with caravans that turn back refugees who move forward, armies that advance, and messages that never arrive. The crossroads does not merely witness collapse. It becomes the place where collapse learns how to spread. Long after the fires cool and the last officials stop sealing storerooms, the region continues to speak from beneath dust. It speaks unevenly and often in fragments, because the past does not survive in the form people would most like. The Great Archive may be missing. The royal inscription may be broken. The city wall may have been robbed for later building stone. The canal may appear only as a faint line across a field visible from above when the light falls at the right angle. A town that once negotiated with empires may now be a low mound where pottery sherds crunch underfoot. Yet these traces are not silence. They are a different kind of testimony, one that must be read through earth pattern, damage, and absence. Archaeology begins by refusing to accept that forgotten means unimportant. A mound rising from a plain may look natural until excavation reveals layer after layer of human return. Mud brick walls melt back into soil, but their outlines remain. Hearths, storage jars, floors, drains, graves, and streets appear slowly under the trowel. The region's story is not found in one magnificent object but in repetition. People build, burn, rebuild, abandon, return, and adapt. Each layer preserves a moment when the corridor was used in a particular way. A thick wall may belong to an age of fear. A rich storage room may belong to an age of trade. A sudden abandonment may belong to a crisis no surviving text names. Tablets, when they survive, are among the most powerful clues. They may not tell heroic stories. Often they list deliveries, debts, workers, animals, rations, fields, taxes, or messages. But this ordinary language reveals the machinery of the world more honestly than royal boasting often does. A tablet naming grain shipments to a garrison shows military dependence on local agriculture. A record of donkeys and loads suggests trade organization. A letter complaining about delayed goods reveals anxiety on the road. A list of foreign names in a local archive hints at migration service diplomacy or captivity. What survives in the record suggests that the corridor was not marginal, it was administratively alive. Fortifications offer another kind of evidence. Walls can show where communities expected danger, but also where they had the labour and authority to organise defence. A city gate rebuilt several times may suggest repeated pressure. Towers placed toward a pass reveal the direction from which threat was expected. Narrowed entrances can signal a period when controlling access mattered more than ceremonial openness. Burned gates sling stones, arrowheads, collapsed ramparts, and hastily repaired walls may point toward conflict, though scholars still debate the meaning of many destruction layers. Fire can come from war accident, earthquake damage, or abandonment. Archaeology offers clues, not courtroom certainty. Canals are quieter, but no less important. An abandoned canal line can reveal the scale of past coordination. Sediment inside it may show periods of use, neglect, flood, or repair. Fields around it may preserve ancient boundaries or salinity patterns. In some places, remote sensing has made visible whole networks of old waterways and roads that are nearly invisible from the ground. These ghost infrastructures remind us that power is not only palaces and weapons, it is the ability to move water across land and keep doing so year after year. When such systems fail, their traces remain like scars of organized effort. Graves carry the story into the human body. Burial customs can reveal local traditions outside influence status. differences, family structures, and changing identities. Objects placed with the dead may include imported beads, weapons, pottery ornaments, or seals showing connections that reached far beyond the grave's immediate landscape. Bones can preserve signs of diet, disease, injury, and labour. Isotopic analysis used cautiously may suggest whether some individuals grew up elsewhere before being buried in the region. Ancient DNA, where preservation allows, can offer clues about population movement, though it must not be treated as a simple map of identity. People are not only their genes. Culture, language, loyalty, and belonging move in more complicated ways. A lesser-known but revealing clue comes from animal remains. The bones of sheep, goats, cattle, donkeys, horses, camels in later periods, and wild animals can show how economies changed. A shift in herd age profiles may suggest whether animals were raised for meat, milk, wool labour, or trade. More donkey remains may point toward transport. Horse equipment may signal elite warfare or diplomatic exchange. Cut marks, pathologies, and stable isotopes can reveal patterns of use and movement. In a corridor, animals are historical actors. They make trade possible, warfare faster, farming productive, and survival more flexible. Their bones are part of the archive. Pottery is often the most abundant clue and one of the most easily underestimated. A broken jar may seem humble, but pottery travels, imitates, and changes in ways that can reveal contact between communities. Some vessels are local copies of foreign styles, some are imported, some are made for storage and transport, others for cooking, feasting, ritual, or everyday use. Changes in pottery can suggest shifts in trade taste, population, or political influence. Yet no single explanation fully accounts for every ceramic change. A new style may come from migration, imitation, market demand, intermarriage, or elite fashion. The difficulty of interpretation is part of what makes the region so important. It was a place where influences did not arrive cleanly labelled. Abandoned houses often tell the most intimate stories. A room with grinding stones and storage jars shows food preparation. Loom weights suggest textile work. Children's objects, tools, hearths, and repairs reveal daily persistence. A house left suddenly may preserve items people would normally take, hinting at emergency flight. A house emptied carefully may suggest planned abandonment. A neighbourhood rebuilt in smaller form may indicate reduced population or changed social organisation. The evidence remains incomplete, but these spaces bring the grand narrative down to the scale where history is actually lived. Empires argue over corridors. Families sweep floors in them. Modern excavation also reveals how much has been lost. Looting destroys context, and context is often more valuable than the object itself. A seal taken from a site without record may still be beautiful, but its historical voice is weakened. War development, agriculture, erosion, dam, construction, and illegal antiquities markets have damaged many ancient landscapes. Some of the very regions that once connected empires now lie in modern zones of conflict or political tension, making archaeological work difficult and sometimes dangerous. The past is not only buried, it is vulnerable in the present. Even when evidence survives, interpretation changes. Early explorers often searched for famous names from texts. They wanted cities connected to kings, battles, and scriptures. Later archaeologists paid closer attention to ordinary settlements, rural landscapes, trade systems, environmental data, and the lives of non-elites. This shift matters greatly for forgotten regions. A place that looks secondary in royal history may appear central when studied as a network. Roads, canals, villages, storage sites, and small forts begin to form a different map of power. The region emerges not as a blank between civilizations, but as the tissue connecting them. The clues beneath dust also reveal contradiction. A city may show signs of foreign influence, but no evidence of violent conquest. A destruction layer may coincide with continued occupation. An imperial seal may appear in a local context that remains culturally distinct. A settlement may decline before the supposed invasion that was once blamed for its fall. Such contradictions are not failures of archaeology, they are warnings against simple stories. Ancient history is rarely a clean sequence of rise, invasion, collapse and replacement. It is more often a set of overlapping adjustments, some sudden, some slow, some visible, some hidden. What becomes clear is that the forgotten region did not matter only when great kings mentioned it. It mattered when farmers expanded fields near a canal, when herders brought animals to market, when scribes counted rations, when builders repaired walls, when merchants stored goods, when families buried their dead with object from far away, when abandoned roads waited for the next power to rediscover them. The region's importance is cumulative. No single artifact proves it controlled the fate of the world. The pattern does. The dust preserves that pattern in broken form. It shows connection, stress adaptation, and repeated struggle for control over movement. It shows that the crossroads was not a passive stage on which empires acted. It had its own rhythms, its own communities, its own forms of power. The great capitals may have written louder records, but the corridor left deeper ones in the land itself. To read them requires patience because the evidence does not shout. It waits in mud brick lines, canal beds, animal bones, seal impressions and roads almost erased by wind. Piece by piece the forgotten region returns not as a legend but as a landscape of consequence. The deeper the evidence becomes, the harder it is to say simply that one forgotten region controlled the fate of the world. It is tempting to make the claim boldly because the pattern is striking. Roads pass through it. Empires fight over it. Trade depends on it. Climate stress there spreads outward. Fortresses rise along its edges. Tablets record goods moving through its towns. Later powers inherit its roots. Yet history resists single causes, and this region's importance must be measured carefully. It shaped events sometimes decisively, but it did not act alone. It was part of a larger web of rivers, mountains, sea lanes, deserts, courts, technologies and human decisions. Its power was real, but it was never absolute. This is where scholars still debate the scale of its influence. One view emphasizes geography. According to this reading, the corridor's position makes it almost unavoidable. Any large power-seeking metals, timber horses' strategic depth, or access to rival lands must eventually confront it. Control of the region therefore becomes a structural necessity. Kings may change languages, may change religions, may change, but the roads remain. The land itself channels ambition. In this view, the region is less a forgotten province than a permanent mechanism inside world history, a place where geography repeatedly turns local control into international consequence. Another view is more cautious. It argues that geography matters deeply but not mechanically. A route is important only when people choose or are forced to use it. Trade can shift. Technologies can change demand. Sea routes can bypass land corridors. Political alliances can make one passage safe and another useless. A region that is central in one century may become secondary in another. The same valley that once carries tin may later carry armies, then pilgrims, then tax grain, then nothing of great consequence for a time. From this perspective, the forgotten region does not control fate by nature alone. It becomes powerful when historical circumstances make its connections valuable. Both views hold part of the truth. Geography creates possibilities and constraints, but people activate them. A mountain pass matters because armies need to cross it. A river matters because farmers, traders, and states organize around it. A desert well matters because caravans know it, and rivals cannot easily replace it. The corridor's influence lies in the interaction between land and human systems. No single explanation fully accounts for its changing power, because the region is not one thing across all time. It is a recurring opportunity, a recurring danger, and a recurring problem for anyone trying to build power across distance. The debate becomes sharper when collapse enters the story. Some interpretations give the region a central role in the breakdown of ancient systems. They point to disrupted trade, destroyed towns, abandoned routes, climate stress, and the collapse of diplomatic networks. If the corridor fails, the argument goes, the wider world loses access to materials information and strategic balance. The fall of one route can weaken many states at once. In this model, the crossroads is a critical node. Its crisis spreads because everyone depends on it. Other scholars warn that this can become too neat. Ancient collapses are rarely caused by the failure of one place. The eastern Mediterranean Mesopotamia, Anatolia, the Levant Egypt, Iran, and surrounding regions each have their own internal tensions. Court politics, succession struggles, debt, social inequality, military change, disease, earthquake, damage, drought, migration, and changing economic priorities may all matter. The corridor can transmit crisis, but it may not originate it. It can magnify collapse without being its single source. The evidence remains incomplete, and in many cases the surviving record is too patchy to assign exact weight to each factor. This uncertainty is not a weakness in the story, it is the story. Forgotten regions become mysterious partly because they sit at the intersection of too many causes. They are where climate meets politics, where trade meets war, where local survival meets imperial ambition. A drought record in a cave formation may suggest stress. A destruction layer may suggest violence. A tablet may suggest administrative anxiety. A settlement survey may suggest population movement. Each clue points in a direction, but none alone can explain the whole transformation. The truth likely lies in combination, and combination is always harder to narrate than catastrophe. A lesser-known difficulty comes from the uneven survival of voices. Empires often describe borderland peoples in ways that serve imperial ideology. They may call them rebels, barbarians, servants, bandits, tribute bearers, or allies, depending on the political need of the moment. Local records, when they exist, may be brief or lost. Archaeology can correct some distortions, but it cannot always recover intention. A fortified town might be a rebel stronghold, an imperial outpost, a local defensive centre, or all three at different times. A group described as raiders in one text may have been trading partners in another season. The categories are unstable because life in the corridor is unstable. Modern maps create another problem. They divide space into countries, provinces, borders, and regions that ancient people would not necessarily recognize. A modern observer may ask which nation inherited the forgotten crossroads, but the ancient landscape may have been organized around rivers' routes, shrines, kinship networks, seasonal pastures, and city territories instead. Names shift across languages and centuries. The same area may appear under different labels in Egyptian, Akkadian, Hittite, Greek, Persian, Roman, Arabic, or later sources. This can make the region seem to disappear and reappear, when in reality the land remains while political vocabulary changes around it. There is also the danger of hindsight. Because later events become famous, historians may look backward and overemphasize the routes that led to them. A pass becomes important because a famous army used it, but perhaps it was only one of several options at the time. A city becomes central because its archive survived while another equally important town remains unknown because its tablets decayed. A region appears forgotten not only because ancient people neglected it, but because modern evidence survived unevenly. What survives in the record suggests importance, but the record itself is an accident shaped by fire, mud, excavation, politics, and chance. Still, caution should not become blindness. The fact that the region's influence is hard to measure does not make it small. History often depends on systems that are visible only when they fail. Roads are taken for granted until they close. Grain shipments seem ordinary until they stop. A buffer state seems minor until it changes sides. A well seems insignificant until an army cannot cross without it. The crossroads belongs to this category of hidden importance. It is not always spectacular, but it is foundational. Its power lies in making other powers possible. The debate over control also forces a deeper question about what control means. To control the fate of the world does not necessarily mean to rule it deliberately. The region may not have chosen the destiny of empires with conscious intention. Its local rulers were often trying to survive, not design global history. Its merchants wanted profit, not world order. Its farmers wanted water, not imperial strategy. Yet their collective position affected outcomes. A landscape can control fate without planning it. A narrow bridge controls movement because bodies must cross it. A dry pass controls armies because water limits them. A trade corridor controls economies because goods must move through human hands. In this sense, the forgotten region's power is structural rather than theatrical. It does not always produce famous names. It produces dependencies. It makes kings negotiate with people they would rather ignore. It turns local drought into wider shortage. It turns small forts into imperial necessities. It turns merchants into intelligence networks. It turns roads into arteries. When those arteries are healthy, the world expands. When they are blocked, the world contracts. The most responsible answer then is neither exaggeration nor dismissal. The region did not single-handedly command history. No place does. But it repeatedly occupied positions where the choices of many civilizations narrowed. It was a bottleneck, a meeting ground, a supply chain, a shield, a temptation and a wound. Its influence rose and fell, but it returned because geography and human need kept meeting there. The evidence remains incomplete, but the pattern is too persistent to ignore. This is why the forgotten region matters now, even when its ancient names are obscure. It changes the way history is understood. It shifts attention away from capitals alone and toward the connective tissue between them. It reminds us that power is not only the ability to build monuments, issue laws, or win battles. Power is also the ability to keep movement possible, to manage fragile landscapes, to translate between worlds, and to survive at the place where everyone else's ambitions arrive. The debate over its power does not weaken the mystery, it sharpens it. The more carefully one looks, the more the region appears not as the owner of fate, but as the place where fate repeatedly had to pass. When the old powers weaken, the roads do not vanish. They wait. This is one of the most important truths about a crossroads region. Cities may burn, dynasties may collapse, archives may fall silent, and local names may disappear from the written record. But the underlying logic of the land remains. Rivers still create corridors of settlement. Passes still invite armies. Plains still allow movement. Deserts still force travellers toward wells and oases. A ruined fortress may no longer fly the banner of its builders, yet the ridge beneath it continues to watch the same road. Later empires inherit not only territory, but ancient habits of movement already carved into the landscape. This inheritance can be seen in the way successive powers return to the same strategic zones. Assyrian kings push through corridors that earlier merchants and diplomats knew well, turning trade routes into military roads and frontier provinces. Persian administrators later organized vast imperial spaces by connecting regions through roads, relay stations, satrapies, and systems of tribute. Greek and Macedonian armies moved through inherited channels of conquest and supply, often discovering that victory still depends on old crossings, local guides, and the ability to feed men and animals across difficult ground. Roman power, centuries later, builds roads, forts, and frontier systems over landscapes already shaped by older traffic. Byzantine, Arab, Turkic, Mongol, Ottoman, and later imperial movements continue the pattern in altered forms. The names change. The logic remains recognizable. The Assyrians understood the corridor with particular severity. Their empire depends on movement armies marching quickly, tribute flowing inward, deported populations being resettled, governors reporting to the center, and fear moving faster than rebellion. In regions of passage, they often create or strengthen provincial structures, garrisons, roads, and administrative centers. Their inscriptions speak in the language of overwhelming royal power, but the very need to campaign repeatedly in frontier zones reveals how hard control remains. A conquered crossroads has to be conquered more than once, if local conditions, rival powers, and distance keep opening cracks. What survives in the record suggests not simple domination but constant effort. The Persian world expands this logic on an even broader scale. A great empire stretching from the eastern Mediterranean towards Central Asia and beyond cannot exist without routes. Royal roads, relay systems, administrative stations, and provincial organization allow power to move across distances that would otherwise break it apart. The forgotten region folded into such a system becomes one segment of a larger imperial network. It may lose some local independence, yet it gains new significance as part of a continental structure. Messages, taxes, troops, craftsmen, officials, and ideas move through it, with a regularity earlier rulers could only partially achieve. Still, the Persian achievement depends on the same old truth: administration can speed movement, but it cannot abolish geography. Greek and Macedonian expansion reveals another inheritance. Conquerors may imagine themselves as bringing a new age, but they often move along roads made meaningful by older worlds. Alexander's campaigns and the kingdoms that follow them depend on supply, local alliances, founded cities, garrisons, and control over communication lines. Hellenistic rulers place Greek-style cities and military settlements in strategic landscapes, but these new foundations rarely emerge from empty space. They are often tied to pre-existing routes, fertile pockets, river crossings, and older settlement patterns. A new city name can cover an old reason for being there. The evidence remains incomplete in many cases, but the repetition of strategic locations is hard to miss. Rome later turns inherited corridors into engineered systems with a distinct imperial signature. Roads are paved or formalized. Forts mark frontiers. Military colonies and provincial capitals anchor control. Trade grows under the protection of imperial order, though never without risk. In some regions, Roman roads follow older tracks because the landscape gives few alternatives. A pass used by Bronze Age traders may become a route for legionaries, merchants, tax officials, pilgrims, and eventually armies of very different faiths and languages. Rome does not invent the corridor's importance. It monumentalizes and militarizes a much older pattern. One lesser-known aspect of this long inheritance is how often ancient infrastructure becomes invisible by being reused. A road maintained by one empire may be repaired by another, then absorbed into a later route, then replaced by a modern highway nearby. A canal line may be cleared, redirected, neglected, and revived over centuries. A fortress mound may hold Assyrian, Hellenistic, Roman, Byzantine, and Islamic layers, each power adapting what came before. Archaeologists sometimes find that later builders cut into earlier walls, reused stones, or rebuilt on the same foundations because the location still made sense. The past survives not only as ruins, but as practical decisions repeated over time. Religions also inherit the corridor. Gods, saints, shrines, pilgrimage routes, sacred mountains, river crossings, and holy cities often follow older patterns of movement. A sanctuary placed near a road may continue to matter under changed religious meanings. A local cult can be reinterpreted, absorbed, or replaced while the site itself remains a point of gathering. In later centuries, monotheistic traditions spread through many of the same connected zones that once carried storm gods, fertility cults, imperial rituals, and local spirits. This does not mean religion spread only because of roads, but roads matter. Belief travels with merchants, soldiers, exiles, monks, administrators, and refugees. The crossroads remains a chamber where ideas echo and transform. Language follows similar paths. Imperial languages rise and fall, but the region's multilingual character persists. Aramaic spreads widely as an administrative and trade language across Near Eastern worlds, partly because empires and merchants need communication across difference. Greek later becomes a language of administration, cities, scholarship, and elite exchange in many Eastern regions after Alexander. Latin marks Roman power in some areas, while local languages continue underneath or beside it. Arabic later reshapes the linguistic and religious landscape across enormous territories. No single explanation fully accounts for these language shifts, because conquest, administration, religion, commerce, migration, and prestige all work together. Yet the corridor makes such shifts more intense by concentrating contact. The inheritance of roots also means the inheritance of conflict. Later empires fight over the same spaces not because they lack imagination, but because strategic geography repeats its demands. A frontier between Rome and Parthia, then Roman Sasanian Persia, does not perfectly replicate older conflicts, yet it often revolves around familiar principles: control of cities, river crossings, buffer kingdoms, caravan routes, and military access. Borderlands become theatres of diplomacy and war, where local rulers again balance between larger powers. The ancient pattern returns under new names. A small kingdom can still matter if it sits between giants. A fortified city can still decide a campaign. A desert route can still surprise an enemy who thinks it is safe. For people living in these later periods, the corridor's deep history may not be visible as a continuous story. A farmer under Roman rule may not know the Bronze Age name of the mound near his field. A Byzantine soldier may camp beside ruins older than his empire can imagine. An Arab geographer may describe towns whose locations were important long before Arabic became the language of record. Memory is layered unevenly. Some ruins become legendary, others become quarries. Some ancient names survive in altered forms, others vanish completely. The land remembers through use more reliably than people remember through stories. The consequences of this inheritance are profound. It means that the forgotten region never truly exits history. Even when one age forgets it, another rediscovers its usefulness. The corridor can shift from trade route to invasion road, from imperial province to religious frontier, from agricultural zone to contested border, from caravan passage to railway or pipeline corridor in much later times. Each transformation seems new to those who live through it, yet beneath it lies the same underlying question: who controls movement between worlds? This continuity does not mean nothing changes. Technologies alter the scale and speed of control. Camels, cavalry, paved roads, ships, gunpowder, railways, aircraft, and modern states all transform the meaning of distance. Sea routes can reduce dependence on some land corridors. New capitals can shift attention. Climate and settlement patterns can alter the importance of particular zones. Scholars still debate the degree to which ancient roots directly shape later ones, because continuity is sometimes broken, and later parallels can be overstated. Yet in many cases the recurrence is too strong to ignore. Landscapes that gather movement tend to gather history again. The forgotten region's legacy, then, is not a single uninterrupted chain of rulers. It is a repeated strategic grammar. Empires learn to speak it in different languages. They build roads, forts, tax systems, alliances, and sacred landscapes according to the same basic rules of access and constraint. They try to master the corridor, and the corridor teaches them the old lesson: movement is power. But movement requires consent from land, water, weather, and local knowledge. By the time later empires inherit these routes, the original cities of the region may already be buried. Their tablets may be unread for thousands of years. Their gods may be forgotten. Their kings may survive only as broken names. Yet their world has not vanished completely. It remains in the placement of roads, in the stubborn importance of passes in the rise of later frontier cities, in the repeated anxiety of empires facing one another across the same contested spaces. The crossroads outlives its own memory. It continues to shape events long after those who first made it powerful are gone. A region can remain important long after people stop remembering why. This is one of the stranger fates of ancient crossroads. Their roads continue, their towns are rebuilt, their fields are replanted, their wells are renamed, and their ruins are absorbed into later landscapes. But the older story slips away. The world remembers the empires that marched through, the kings who claimed victory, the sacred books that preserved certain names, and the cities that became symbols. It forgets the smaller places that made movement possible. It forgets the guides, market towns, fortified passes, caravan stations, canal workers, scribes, hostages, and local rulers who stood where history had to pass. Forgetting does not happen all at once. It accumulates through conquest, language change, migration erosion, and the ordinary reuse of land. A city falls and its name survives for a while among neighbours. Later settlers pronounce it differently. A new empire records it in a new script. A shrine is rededicated. A road shifts slightly toward a better crossing. A mound becomes a landmark rather than a memory. Farmers plough around stones whose builders no one can name. Shepherds shelter near walls that were once part of an administrative centre. Children grow up with stories about giants, lost kings, spirits, or cursed ruins, because when exact memory fades, imagination often covers the wound. The region is forgotten partly because it rarely belongs to one clean story. It is claimed by many worlds and therefore owned by none in memory. Mesopotamian texts may mention it as a frontier. Egyptian records may see it as a route toward Asia. Hittite, Assyrian, Persian, Greek, Roman, Byzantine, Arab, and later sources may describe parts of it under different names and priorities. Each archive captures the region at an angle. None preserves the whole. What survives in the record suggests continuity of importance, but the continuity is hidden beneath changing labels. Later readers see separate episodes where ancient travellers experience connected geography. Modern education often strengthens this forgetting by organising ancient history around famous civilizations. Egypt stands beside the Nile. Mesopotamia lies between rivers. Greece rises around the Aegean. Rome expands from Italy. Persia stretches across Asia. These categories are useful, but they can make the spaces between them look secondary. The map becomes a set of centres, and the corridors become blank connective tissue. Yet those blank spaces are where many of the centres met, traded, fought, borrowed, and transformed. The forgotten region fades not because it lacks influence, but because influence without a single monumental identity is harder to teach and remember. There is also the problem of ruins themselves. Some regions leave pyramids, temples, theatres, stone inscriptions, and monumental city plans that impress later visitors. Others build mostly in mud brick, timber, and earth materials that return more easily to the land. Mud brick can preserve beautifully when buried, but from the surface it may look like a hill. A city of enormous historical importance may appear less dramatic than a much later stone ruin of narrower consequence. Popular memory often follows visibility. Stone survives as spectacle. Mud brick survives as archaeology. The corridor's past is therefore not absent. It is less theatrical until someone digs. A lesser-known reason for forgetting is the success of later powers in reusing the same spaces. When a Roman road follows an older track, the Roman layer may dominate memory. When a medieval fortress rises on an ancient mound, the visible castle becomes the story. When a modern town covers a Bronze Age settlement, daily life hides deep time beneath streets, courtyards, and foundations. Reuse preserves importance while erasing recognition. The land remains valuable, so people keep building there. Because they keep building there, earlier layers become harder to see. The crossroad survives by being overwritten. Language deepens the loss. Ancient place names often pass through many tongues, each adapting sounds to its own habits. Some names survive in altered forms, carrying ghosts of older identities. Others vanish when populations move, scripts disappear, or administrative systems collapse. A name in a clay tablet may not be easily matched to a modern site. A site may be excavated before scholars agree what ancient name it bore. Sometimes several locations compete for the same textual identification. Scholars still debate many such questions, not because the region is imaginary, but because memory broke into pieces. The evidence remains incomplete, and the brokenness itself tells part of the story. Despite this forgetting, the region is not gone. Its marks remain in borders, routes, languages, religious traditions, settlement patterns, and political anxieties. Modern boundaries often cut across old corridors or follow lines shaped by older imperial frontiers. Roads and highways may still run where terrain makes movement easiest. Market towns may continue to occupy ancient nodes of exchange. Sacred landscapes may retain importance under new names. Even where the ancient past is unknown to most inhabitants, the practical logic of place continues to guide life. People still gather where water movement and safety meet. The legacy also survives in cultural mixture. Crossroads rarely produce pure categories. They produce layered identities. Foods, words, musical forms, architectural habits, religious practices, and family histories can carry traces of centuries of contact. Some influences are ancient beyond easy recognition. Others are more recent, but they follow channels opened long before. No single explanation fully accounts for the cultural density of such regions, because every period adds another layer. The result can seem confusing to outsiders who expect simple origins. In reality, the mixture is the inheritance. This is why forgotten regions often become contested in modern imagination. Different peoples may claim different layers of the past. Archaeological discoveries can become symbols of national pride, religious inheritance, ethnic belonging, or political grievance. A ruined city is never only a ruin when living communities argue over history. It can be evidence, trophy wound, or foundation myth. The ancient corridor, once contested by empires for strategic reasons, becomes contested again for memory. Control of the past becomes another form of power, yet archaeology can also soften the arrogance of single claims. Beneath one layer lies another, and beneath that another. A site may contain evidence of languages, rituals, diets, burial customs, and political systems, that do not fit neatly into modern identities. This does not make modern attachments false, but it complicates them. The land has belonged to many communities in many ways. It has been crossed, settled, abandoned, conquered, rebuilt, and remembered differently. What survives in the record suggests that identity here has always been plural. The ancient region resists being reduced to one owner, just as it once resisted being reduced to one empire. Forgetting can also be a consequence of trauma. Places that endure repeated war displacement and conquest may lose archives not only to time but to violence. Libraries burn, temples are stripped, families flee, oral traditions break when communities are uprooted. Later generations remember survival more urgently than ancient detail. A road that once carried trade may become associated with invasion. A fortress that once protected a town may become a symbol of oppression. Memory chooses what it can bear. Sometimes the deep past sinks because the more recent past is already too heavy. Still, there is a quiet persistence in the landscape. The mound remains, the canal line remains, the road, or the need for a road, remains. A shepherd may not know the name of the kingdom beneath his feet, but his flock follows water patterns older than recorded history. A farmer may uncover a sherd while planting and set it aside without knowing it, once sealed the contents of a storage jar in a world of bronze. A child may play near stones that marked a gate through which envoys passed with letters that changed the balance between empires. The past is close not because it is fully remembered, but because it has never fully left. The forgotten region is therefore forgotten only in a limited sense. It is forgotten by simplified histories, by distant observers, by narratives that prefer capitals and conquerors. It is not forgotten by the land. It is not forgotten by the roots that continue to matter. It is not forgotten by the buried record, and it is not entirely forgotten by the cultures that still carry fragments of its long work of connection. Its influence has become so embedded in later history that it can be mistaken for background. That may be the deepest form of historical disappearance. A thing can become invisible not because it is absent, but because it is everywhere. The corridor once shaped the movement of goods, armies, languages, gods, and ideas. Later worlds inherited those movements and renamed them. The old crossroads slipped behind newer maps, but the pattern endured. Forgotten but not gone, it remains under the surface of history, like an ancient road beneath a modern one unseen in daily travel, yet still guiding the direction of the journey. The modern shadow of the ancient crossroads is difficult to escape because the old geography still has weight. The names of kingdoms have changed, the languages of administration have changed, the weapons have changed beyond anything the Bronze Age could have imagined. But the underlying question remains familiar: who controls movement through the land between worlds? Roads have become highways, caravan routes have become rail corridors, ancient passes have become military objectives, and old zones of exchange have become borders, pipelines, ports, air routes, and contested regions of identity. The forgotten region is no longer the same political world, but it still lives under the pressure of connection. Modern maps can make this seem new. They draw firm lines where older life was often seasonal, layered, and negotiated. A border may cut across pastoral routes that once shifted with weather. A modern state may inherit a frontier that began as an imperial edge many centuries earlier. A city that appears provincial on a contemporary map may stand near a place that once linked empires. The past is not a simple explanation for the present, and it would be careless to pretend ancient history alone causes modern conflict. Yet geography continues to frame choices. Mountains still channel roads. Deserts still concentrate movement around water and infrastructure. River valleys still support dense settlement. Strategic corridors remain strategic because bodies, goods, armies and energy must still cross space. In many of these regions, archaeology itself becomes part of modern life. Excavations reveal cities older than familiar national histories. Museums preserve objects whose meanings are claimed by many communities. A tablet, a seal, a statue, a wall, or a burial can become evidence not only of the past but of belonging. Governments may support archaeology to strengthen identity. Local communities may see ruins as heritage, livelihood, sacred ground, or foreign intrusion. Scholars still debate how best to protect and interpret such landscapes, especially where modern conflict, development, looting, and political pressure threaten fragile sites. The evidence remains incomplete, partly because the work of recovering it is never separate from the world in which it happens. The damage can be severe. War destroys more than buildings, it destroys context. A looted tomb loses the arrangement that made its objects meaningful. A bulldozed mound erases layers that took thousands of years to form. A museum theft scatters artifacts into private markets where beauty survives but history weakens. Satellite images sometimes reveal illegal digging as fields of small scars, each hole a missing page. There is a bitter irony in this. The same regions that once mattered because they connected worlds now suffer because modern networks can move stolen antiquities quickly across borders. The road still carries treasure away. Energy routes add another layer to the old pattern. Oil, gas, electricity lines, railways, canals, ports, and shipping corridors have replaced bronze and tin as strategic materials of global concern. The comparison should not be pushed too far because the modern world operates on a scale and technology unimaginable to ancient states. Still, the structural resemblance is striking. Powerful states and corporations care deeply about corridors that move essential resources. Local communities live with the consequences of that attention. Stability, access, security, and control become international concerns. Once again, regions that appear peripheral to some observers become central because something vital must pass through them. The modern shadow also falls on identity. Crossroads produce layered populations, and layered populations often unsettle political projects that prefer simplicity. Languages overlap. Religious communities share landscapes. Ethnic identities may be old, recent revived, suppressed, or intertwined. A town may contain memories of several empires, several sacred histories, and several claims to belonging. No single explanation fully accounts for such complexity. Ancient mixture does not automatically create modern harmony, and it does not automatically create conflict. It does, however, mean that simple stories of pure origin often break against the evidence of the land itself. The corridor has always been a place of encounter, and encounter leaves descendants. Climate has returned as a force in the story, not as a repetition of the ancient past, but as a reminder that landscapes remain fragile. Drought water, stress soil, exhaustion, population growth and political instability can still interact in dangerous ways. Modern engineering can move water farther and faster than ancient canals, but it also creates new dependencies. Dams, irrigation schemes, groundwater, pumping, and urban expansion can support millions while increasing vulnerability if systems fail or become contested. The ancient record does not provide a simple lesson, but it offers a warning. Societies are strongest when they respect the limits of the landscapes that sustain them. When power assumes that infrastructure has conquered nature completely, the old arrogance returns in modern clothes. One lesser-known continuity is the importance of local knowledge. Satellites can map terrain, and states can draw plans from distant capitals, but people who live in a landscape still know details. No map fully captures seasonal water behavior, informal routes, social boundaries, sacred places, danger zones, memories of floods, soils that fail under pressure, winds that bury roads, and the practical trust networks that allow movement. Ancient empires needed guides and intermediaries. Modern powers still do, though they may use different words for them. The corridor has always rewarded those who understand that control from above is incomplete without knowledge from within. Tourism and heritage bring both protection and distortion. A ruin open to visitors can gain funding, attention, and preservation. It can also be simplified into a spectacle. The quiet systems that made a region powerful: canals, roads, storage sites, villages, animal economies, administrative routines are harder to display than a palace wall or a royal statue. Visitors often want a single story: a lost city, a vanished civilization, a mysterious collapse. The real story is wider and more demanding. It is about networks, labor, environmental risk, and the deep history of movement. The forgotten region asks to be understood not only through its monuments, but through its connections. Modern scholarship has begun to recover this wider view with tools ancient historians could not have imagined. Remote sensing reveals buried roads and settlement patterns. Environmental science reconstructs rainfall, vegetation, and river change. Chemical analysis traces the origins of metals, ceramics, and human remains. Digital mapping allows researchers to model routes, visibility, travel time, and resource zones. These methods do not remove uncertainty, but they sharpen the questions. The evidence remains incomplete, yet the forgotten region becomes clearer as a system. It was not merely a place where things happened. It was a structure that made certain things possible. The moral weight of this recovery is significant. To study a crossroads is to restore importance to people often left outside grand narratives. Farmers who maintained canals, herders who knew seasonal routes, women whose textile labor fed trade guides who led caravans, scribes who recorded deliveries, builders who repaired walls, and families who endured the ambitions of distant kings, all become part of world history. Their lives may not be recoverable in full, but their presence can be recognized. The fate of the world was not controlled only by rulers. It rested on countless acts of labor and adaptation in places later called marginal. The modern shadow of the region is therefore not only geopolitical, it is intellectual. It changes how the past is seen. It asks historians, filmmakers, archaeologists, and listeners to look away from the obvious center and toward the difficult middle ground. It asks why some places become famous and others become invisible. It asks how much of civilization depends on roads, water trust, and people who stand between powers. It asks whether modern societies, with all their speed and technology, are as free from geography as they sometimes imagine. The answer is not comforting, but it is clarifying. The old crossroads still matters because human life still depends on connection. Food, fuel, data, minerals, migrants. Armies, money, and ideas move through corridors. When those corridors are stable, they disappear into routine. When they break, everyone notices. The ancient region once controlled fate in the age of donkeys, bronze seals, and mud brick forts. Its modern descendants control fate in the age of engines, pipelines, satellites, and borders. The tools have changed, the vulnerability has not, and beneath the modern surface the older layers remain. A highway may pass near a buried caravan station. A military base may occupy a ridge watched by ancient guards. A pipeline may cross land where merchants once led pack animals between wells. A border checkpoint may stand near a route older than the states that police it. The present does not erase the past. It builds over it, argues with it, damages it, preserves it, and unknowingly repeats it. The forgotten region continues to cast its shadow because it was never truly outside history. It was one of the places where history learned how to move. the fate-controlled world does not reveal itself from the throne room first. It appears on the road where a caravan slows before a guarded gate, where a farmer watches canal water drop lower than expected, where a local ruler studies two rival messengers and knows that either answer may bring ruin. It appears in the narrow places where movement can be delayed, taxed, protected, or destroyed. The forgotten region matters because it shows that world history often turns in spaces that later maps treat as edges. Capitals may announce decisions, but corridors decide whether those decisions can travel. This is the final shape of the mystery. The region does not control fate like a king issuing commands. It controls fate like a landscape that everyone needs and no one fully owns. Its power is practical, quiet, and repeated. It lies in the fact that grain must move, metals must move, armies must move, messages must move, refugees must move, and ideas must move. The ancient world is not a collection of sealed civilizations, it is a living web, and the crossroads is one of the knots. When the knot holds distant worlds become connected. When it tightens, kingdoms feel pressure. When it breaks, the damage travels. What survives in the record suggests that this forgotten region is never simply one thing. It is a trade route in one age, a frontier in another, a battlefield in another, a province in another, a sacred landscape in another, and a buried archaeological puzzle in the present. Its names change because the powers around it change. Its people adapt because survival demands adaptation. Farmers, herders, merchants, scribes, soldiers, priests, diplomats, hostages, guides, and refugees all leave traces there even when history remembers only the rulers who passed through. Scholars still debate how much any single corridor or borderland can be said to shape the whole world, and the caution is necessary. No single region explains all ancient history. Climate shifts, internal politics, technology, disease, ambition, inequality, belief, and chance all play their parts. Yet no single explanation fully accounts for the repeated return of power to the same kinds of places. Again and again, empires discover that the world is not controlled only by wealth or armies. It is controlled by access. It is controlled by the fragile ability to keep roads open, water-managed loyalties balanced and fear contained. The forgotten region once controlled fate because it stood between needs. Lowland cities needed upland resources. Farmers needed herders. Kings needed merchants. Armies needed supplies. Temples needed offerings. Ambitious empires needed passage. Rival powers needed buffers. Ordinary families needed enough stability to survive another season. All of these needs crossed in the same landscapes. That is why a small fortress could matter to a great empire. That is why a drought in a border valley could ripple into trade. That is why a treaty with a minor ruler could preserve peace for years, and why its failure could open the road to war. In the end, the region's forgotten status is part of its lesson. Human memory prefers the visible centre, palaces, monuments, famous battles, royal names. But civilization depends on less visible systems. It depends on storage rooms, roads, wells, canals, animal tracks, market, trust, scribal records, seasonal agreements, and local knowledge. These systems rarely look grand until they fail. Then their importance becomes undeniable. The ancient world learned this repeatedly, often too late. The region also reminds us that borders are not empty. They're crowded with life exchange, fear, opportunity, and invention. They're not merely lines separating civilizations. They're places where civilizations are made and remade. Languages mix there. Gods travel there. Technologies spread there. Armies bleed there. Families endure there. A forgotten crossroads may seem peripheral only from a distance. From the ground, it is the center of everything that is moving. Even now, the buried evidence continues to change the story. A newly mapped canal, a re-examined tablet, a chemical trace in metal, a grave showing distant origin, a settlement survey revealing abandoned villages, each adds another thread. The evidence remains incomplete, and perhaps it always will. But incompleteness does not mean emptiness. It means the past is still partly hidden, still waiting under fields, roads, towns, and dust. The world that once moved through this region is gone, yet its pattern remains familiar. Power still depends on corridors. Prosperity still depends on supply lines. States still fear unstable frontiers. Communities still live with the consequences of decisions made far away. The old crossroads speaks across time because it reveals a permanent truth beneath changing empires. History is not only made where rulers sit, it is made where movement must pass. In the quiet after the empires fade, the land remains. The road is softer now, half covered by dust and scrub. The gate is broken. The canal is dry. The names once spoken in the market have thinned into fragments carried only by tablets, stones, and the patient work of those who search the ground for what memory has lost. Yet the place is not empty. It holds the weight of footsteps, wheels, hooves, prayers, bargains, hunger, fear, and hope. It holds the long patience of landscapes that outlast the people who try to command them. A river bends where it has always bent. A ridge still watches the plain. A buried wall still points toward a road that once mattered to kings. The forgotten region does not ask to be remembered as a single empire, a single city, or a single mystery solved at last. It asks to be seen as a living threshold, a place where worlds touched and changed one another. Its story is quieter than conquest, but deeper than conquest. It is the story of connection and of how fragile connection can be. Civilizations rise with confidence, naming themselves eternal. They build walls, count grain seal letters, and send armies toward the horizon. But beneath every claim of permanence lies dependence. Dependence on rain. Dependence on soil. Dependence on roads. Dependence on strangers keeping promises somewhere far away. The old crossroads remembers this without speaking. It remembers that the fate of the world can rest in places that seem small, dry, remote, or forgotten. It remembers that history moves through hands as much as crowns, through wells as much as palaces, through narrow passes as much as battlefields. And as evening settles over the ruined land, the last light falls across the dust like a thin layer of gold. The road is almost gone, but not completely. It still runs beneath the surface, quiet and enduring, waiting for the next traveller to follow its fading line.